Welcome to the Oxford Science Podcast, first episode. Today I'm joined by Evan Roberts, a PhD student who I work together with. Well, it's an overstatement. I have lunch together with him. Do you want to give a brief introduction? What are you doing in Oxford?
Sure. I work at the psychiatry department in the Oxford Human Brain Activity Centre. I'm part of Mark Woolwich's group, so our focus is methods development, so like machine learning, analysing different types of neuroimaging data. We focus on magnetoencephalography, which is kind of like EEG, but with magnets.
Yeah, so we'll get into this a bit more, but the first question I wanted to ask you is, what is your relationship with neuroscience? Like, if you would put this Facebook status label on it.
Complicated.
Well, that's what I would have guessed, yeah.
Yeah, I'm distant with neuroscience, I guess. My background is physics, and my focus is definitely more involved with the coding side of things. I'm much more interested in how TensorFlow works than how the motor cortex makes your finger twitch. I think brains are really interesting and cool, but they're super complicated, and I guess I find them interesting, but that's kind of not my. I guess for me, neuroscience is just the bit of science I'm doing, rather than the bit of science I'm in love with.
So would you say you're not that interested in it scientifically? It's more...
I'm not sure that's true, actually, either. I'm definitely interested in it, and when people tell me things about it, I think they're very cool. I'm just not particularly interested in being on the cutting edge of neuroscience and doing that discovery myself.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, what made you switch from physics to this intersection of machine learning and neuroscience?
So I think when I was an undergrad, I had a bit of a physicist's god complex. I thought that all of the other sciences were squishy nonsense.
Oh, is that what happens in physics? I wonder how math is then.
Oh my god, maths! They probably just think that physics is the most pointless real world application of maths. But no, I think I gradually sort of came around to the perspective that actually other things were also worthwhile. And sort of when I did my A-levels, I did maths, chemistry, biology, physics. I'd already figured out that was the direction I was going. And then in my third and fourth year of my undergrad, I found myself taking more sort of biophysics, biochemistry modules, and really enjoying it, and even enjoying a little bit of wet lab stuff, messing around with scanning, tunneling microscopes and things like that, atomic force microscopy. So I started looking for these sort of intersection PhDs, and came across systems approaches to biomedical science, which is the CDT, the Centre for Doctoral Training, that I started on at Oxford. And when you start there, you come with a pot of money, which goes to your tuition fees and everything. So you're basically a free default student for whoever wants you. And they provide you with a list of projects from supervisors, from PIs who've decided that they would like one of these sort of intersection students. And one of them was Mark. And his project looked kind of cool. I went around, I visited 8 different projects. I spent a little bit of time in the maths department doing some finite element analysis, which was very mathsy. I mean, shock, it was in the maths department. But yeah, I was looking at mass spectrometry, which I did a bit of in my fourth year of undergrad. And then I came and saw Mark and talked to him about the project. I just thought it sounded really cool. Although he said MEG a bunch of times and I didn't know what it meant, which was a little bit embarrassing. So I looked that up after I'd left and then realised I really should have known that before I arrived. yeah, so I did my 3 months here and thought it was kind of cool, really liked the vibe and stuck around. But yeah, it was never an intention to explicitly move into neuroscience. It was just, I got interested in the borderlands of physics and just sort of gradually shifted away from the intense stuff like particle physics and general relativity.
Yeah, it sounds like you explored quite a diverse range of topics then.
Yeah,
before
a bit of a jack of all trades.
Yeah, I think you still have that.
Yeah,
somewhere. So, if you wouldn't have done this, what would have been your second best choice? Or
I don't know. I suppose.
I mean, in the same CDT. Right?
Yeah. Oh, I see. Right. So I would have probably ended up doing my the project that I did in maths, which was so it was another collaboration with Roche Pharmaceuticals, developing simulations of like 3D organ on a chip systems, which is where you essentially have a scaffold and a 3D arrangement of cells on there, and you try and replicate the conditions inside an organ or inside a tissue. So, for example, you want to know what happens when liver cells are exposed to like XYZ change in their environment, chemically, for example. And so you start passing that through this little system and just seeing what happens. And so we were trying to optimize their systems to be as biologically relevant as possible by doing a bunch of differential calculus.
Oh, proper math.
Oh yeah. But no, it didn't really feel like there was a full project there. So I'm glad that the one here worked out. I think I could have done a master's in that lab, but I'm not convinced that it would have lasted a full DPhil.
Yeah. It sounds incredibly different, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is quite cool. I guess physics and maybe the biophysics that you did at the end prepared you a bit to take on different types of work afterwards, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think doing a physics degree really gives you a massive tool set. You come at it with sort of a good perspective on science. You come at it with a good maths background. I came through like a bunch of coding things, so I was a decent programmer by the time I left. It was, and you come at it ready to sit on the intersection of all these different fields, and it really just, it sets you up so well.
So when you started dabbling a bit in these biophysics courses and taking this stuff, were you still thinking like, oh, this is all just actually physics, this kind of mindset? Or when did you start appreciating that biology is different and neuroscience is different and chemistry is different from physics?
So I suppose when I was doing my biophysics modules, they were very stats focused at the start. Like you start off with a statistical description of a system. How does something diffuse from here to there? When it's diffusing, how is it interacting? And you very quickly end up with these systems that just bear no resemblance to the simple equation you started with. And I think for me that was kind of an O moment. I'm used to looking at the heat equation or like a propagation of a wave and saying like, well, in 200 time steps it will look like this, or like maybe it even has an analytical solution. And then you come into biology and you've got Brownian motion and things are doing all sorts of crazy stuff and interacting with each other in weird ways. And that's before you even consider everything that's going on around it. You've got your immune system suddenly getting in the way, and so the cells start behaving differently. It's just so messy, and I think really that's the departure. There's plenty of messy bits of physics as well, but
messy in a different way.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of just so much magnitude to the chaos There's to the point where the effect you're looking at almost gets diminished by all of the stuff that's going on around it. I mean, we see this in scans, right? You know, you're going through data and someone moves their eyes and suddenly your data's useless because there's a massive spike in the signal. Yeah.
Is there any reason why you didn't stop with physics? Just physics?
I think I'd just sort of seen my time out there. I'm sure I could have found something to be interested in. I'm sure I could have found like the project for me, but like by the time I'd gotten around to applying to PhDs, I was pretty confident that I wanted to be elsewhere. It wasn't like I didn't move away from physics necessarily as I moved towards something different. I think 4 years is a long time to study anything. Yeah. And
I guess you feel the same about your PhD, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's been a long time.
But yeah, that makes sense, right? You always want to shift a bit, to explore different stuff. All right. That's really interesting. But I do want to talk a bit more about neuroscience, even though, well, we'll see. What is the most interesting for you in this field? I think that's a question you can answer, even if, just as an interesting thing in general.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that. I think I find memory really interesting. I don't know a huge amount about it, but just the idea that somewhere in your brain there is some collection of cells, some system that can reproduce a thing that happened to you or a thing that didn't happen to you. You know, you can have like false memories, but you know, the fact that your brain can hallucinate to itself and call up these things that you knew, and that, you know, you think too hard about something and it just vanishes in front of you. You know, this sort of conscious and subconscious retrieval of information. I think the underlying mechanisms of that are crazy complicated and poorly understood, like most things in neuroscience. But I think just the phenomena that comes out the end of that is absolutely mental. Very funny.
What's your intuition? Is it, if you would have to assimilate it to computers, is it more similar to like storage, cold storage, or to RAM?
Well, I think we kind of have both in the brain, right? There's this kind of active storage that goes on where your brain is sort of keeping stuff in your conscious mind, and some of the folks in our group do replay, which is where your brain essentially reruns through the same signals that it did when you first learned something, when you first saw something, just over a different time scale. And so I think that's maybe akin to RAM, where, you know, it's keeping it fresh. It takes active power to do that. But then there's clearly stuff, because you can remember things that happened 10, maybe just about 20 years ago. And there's no way that your brain is holding that information in a really like active capacity. There has to be something that's fixing it there.
Some kind of chemical substrate.
Yeah.
Instead of neurons just firing and like keeping it in the loop somehow.
Yeah, I'm not gonna claim to know anything about this, but
me neither. So.
Yeah, I'm sure there are appropriate people in the department who will tell me that I'm currently publicly wrong.
It's fine. It's okay to be wrong. That's the most interesting. So, what would you say is the goal of neuroscience? Another very difficult question.
Goal of neuroscience. I suppose there's a few answers. Academically, we want to understand the brain. We want, I suppose, as full a description as possible of what it's doing. And that can be a completely detached endeavor. You know, it's interesting to know things. But also, from a, you know, human betterment perspective, if we know more about the brain, then we know more about how to treat it when it goes wrong. We know more about how to enhance it if that's something that people want to do. If we know the precise balance of chemicals that trigger certain reactions, certain pathways, then we can really treat things in a more educated way. And so much of psychiatry in the clinic is guesswork. There's 10 drugs. Oh, we'll try you on this one. Did that one work? No, we'll try you on the next one. And I think if we can get to a point where psychiatry is in line with the rest of medicine for predictability of outcomes and reliability of treatments, then we'll be in a much better place for everyone who uses those services.
So it's both the understanding and the application of that understanding.
Yeah, I would say so.
To, I guess, improve people's lives in general.
Yeah. I think humans are curious, and we like knowing things about us. But there's particularly, we live in the real world, and funding comes from somewhere. And as much as politicians, I'm sure, are overjoyed that we understand what a certain inch squared of the brain does, then I'm sure they would much prefer to tell voters, I funded something which cured depression in 20% of people who were suffering.
Because that's measurable.
Yeah, exactly.
So exactly. So what do you think when you say understanding to you? What does that mean? And maybe also, how does MEG, magnetoencephalography, tie into this for you? So
when I say understanding, I suppose I mean matching up processes to real world consequences. So it's great to be able to see, oh, my brain's lit up in this area, but if you don't know what that matches to, then you haven't really learned anything. But now we know, I've asked a subject to perform a motor action. I've asked them to twitch their finger, and now I see this bit of the brain is lighting up. And I guess true understanding is more detailed than that. It's this sort of network of things going on in the brain and trying to connect that to the outputs. Ryan, who was in our group before, got to the point where he could look at data and run his analysis, and he could tell which tiny segment of I suppose the motor cortex was corresponding to different fingers on a person's hand. Like, he could tell the difference between an index finger and a pinky finger. And even that perhaps isn't like deep understanding, but it's so impressive to me that we can uncover details like that. And in terms of MEG, magnetoencephalography, it's a really cool technique. It's kind of expensive, and the machines are kind of bulky. So I think people are probably fairly familiar with EEG, electroencephalography, which is where you put on one of those nice caps with the gel on the electrodes, and it measures the electric currents coming off your brain. But the electric currents that measures also produce magnetic fields, and magnetic fields, they don't travel as far, but they do travel uninterrupted through biological tissue, because to a magnetic field, water looks a lot like vacuum and brain looks a lot like water. And so you don't get these kind of smearings. Your signal stays really pure as it comes out. And so we super cool all of our sensors, and we use special quantum devices, and we build big rooms and magnetic chambers, and this all allows us to just take a really good look at the brain. It's like it's kind of like wiping off the smudgy lens on an EEG. It has slight benefits over EEG, and it's got good spatial resolution. It measures quickly, like a few thousand times a second, and we just need all of the resolution we can get to try and see what's going on.
So why do you think it's cool? Is it because it's expensive? Is it because it's big? Or is it because it's somewhat better than EEG.
I think it would be hard to say that it's cool because it's a little bit better than something else. It's definitely a bit of the like 5-year-old kid going, ooh, big machine, ooh, big price tag. And I think, it's also, it's not new, it's been around for decades, but it's less well used, it's less well developed. And I think there's something quite exciting about being sort of on the forefront of something. And the potential for MEG to get used in clinic sometime is awesome. Whether it'll provide much more information than EEG currently does, I have no idea. But clinicians are used to looking at EEG scans and saying, yeah, that person's got epilepsy. Maybe there's conditions that will show up better with MEG scanners, and that'll make it easier for them to detect things. I think the NFL is currently trying to make out that MEG is the way to detect concussions, and I'm not sure how much truth there is in that, but I think that's where some of the money's coming from at the moment.
All right. In terms of understanding, I guess we can talk about, you briefly touched on this, because we can do association, right? Or we can look at causation.
Yeah.
Or maybe a third one could be prediction.
Mm-hmm.
If we can predict brain activity.
Yeah.
Where does MEG fit into this? What's the potential of MEG?
So I guess when it comes to the sort of the causation, you can apply tests to people in these scanner rooms, and you can pick apart these links between things, and it's giving us the details that we can then use to learn things in an academic sense. Pull apart the details of someone's scan and look into it. I'm not really sure, like in terms of prediction, I don't think we're really anywhere near real time MEG yet. I'm not sure about that. There's probably someone somewhere trying, but I haven't seen any research. But yeah, I guess like if we have a good enough description of the brain, we can look at what's going on in someone's head at any given moment and have a decent idea of what's happening there. It's again, I think marginal increases in its strength over EEG, and some spatial flaws compared to fMRI, where you get these super detailed images of the entire volume of the brain, not just the surface. But then we have to take the lower temporal scaling, one image every second or so. So I think there's potential for it to become like a massive tool in the field and to take over some of the work from both EEG and fMRI, but I think it's just going to take a little while to get there.
All right, let's talk about something that's more enjoyable for you. But still along MEG, what are the challenges of doing machine learning with MEG data?
So it's a really big dimensional space, right? We've the scanner that I've been analyzing data from for the last couple of years has 275 channels. So each one of those is recording in some abstract capacity the magnetic field where it is. And so we get all of this data with all of its noise and all of its signal, and it's not much to look at. You just see a bunch of squiggles on a page, and we've got to find these techniques that can compress that data into a form that makes sense to a human mind. Because it's fantastic if the machine understands what the brain's doing, but ideally, as academics, we would like us to understand as well. It makes it a lot easier to publish. And so, we're always looking to find ways of taking these really detailed signals and chopping them up in ways that make them comprehensible to the researchers. And for me, that means building machine learning tools. We use recurrent neural networks and sort of like these static spatial maps of the brain. And we try and get the computer to teach itself what's going on in the signal. And that way we hopefully don't come at it with too much bias from our expectations from what we're giving it in the data.
Well, that's interesting, because even like if these models can learn it, you still have to interpret it.
Yeah.
That's what you said.
Yeah.
The humans still have to visualize it in some way, or to understand it somehow.
Yeah. So I suppose in a way it's just another tool in like the visualization pipeline, which maybe undersells it a little bit, but it's all great if I train a model with 10,000 parameters, and I go, look, parameter 4,732 is 0.3. Like, great, cool nature. They're really gonna care about that. But if I can do something with the results of that model, if I can pass more data through it and it comes out the other end and says, wow, would you look at that? When the task is happening, when someone's moving their finger, this bit of the brain is really firing, then I guess that's probably also not quite worthy of nature, not in this century. But it's
maybe some different journal.
Yeah, I'm sure someone will take it. And yeah, it's part of this interpretation path where we go from like looking at someone with a helmet on to understanding what their brain is trying to do.
And interpretation seems to mean finding the spatial or temporal dynamics aspects of what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's a good characterization. We've got 4 dimensions to work in, and 4 dimensions and 275 degrees of freedom. But yeah, if you can figure out not just which bits of the brain are doing what, but when they do that, and when they do it in relation to other bits of the brain, then you've got a pretty good description of what's happening. In our lab, we like to talk a lot about network dynamics, which is how bits of the brain pair up with each other, and how that ends up executing certain tasks. So maybe there's a bit of the brain called the default mode network, which, I can't necessarily tell you exactly what it does, but it's got something to do with attention and something to do with thinking, and there's lots of different bits trying to light up at the same time. And if those bits of the brain are acting at the same time, chances are they're doing something together. And so that's potentially the temporal aspect, where we're considering how things latch up. Like, if these 2 bits of the brain decide to do something, what's that going to result in for a person?
Again, the type of association or causation between brain areas. Yeah. What is Dynamo? Where does the name come from? And what is it?
The name does not come from NVIDIA's latest work with their neural modules.
You were first, right?
We were first, obviously.
Right.
They've stolen our thunder. They try and copyright it, then we'll have to throw hands. But no, it stands for dynamic network modes. So the modes are the patterns of activation in space. So which bits of the brain are firing at any given time, and like how much, and how that links in with other bits of the brain. We've got networks, which is the sort of greater structure, the mixing between these little bits of brain to create bigger patterns. And dynamic, I guess that one's kind of obvious, but
temporal.
Temporal. Over time it changes. And so we want to know temporally how the networks manifest in the brain. So it's sort of medium-sized network. It's nothing on the scale of your GPTs and, with their billions of parameters. We've got a few thousand. But it's much more specific, so that doesn't really matter.
How does it work, and what does it try to accomplish?
So we take our data, we feed it through some recurrent neural networks, and they tell us sort of like a percentage activation of different modes. At the same time, it's learning what the modes are. So it's saying the modes are this active, but it doesn't really know what the modes are. And it's saying these are what the modes are, but it doesn't really know when they're doing anything. Mm-hmm. And so it's learning these things and trying to segment the data into these categories. And so by the time it's finished its training, it's giving us some reasonable modes which make sense, which have spatial coherence. There's bits that are active together. And it's also telling us when they're doing things. So the idea is to learn both the spatial modes and the temporal dynamics of them at the same time, which again comes down to interpretability. And we compress it from 275 channels down to maybe like 3 or 4 modes, maybe 10. And that just means that you can say, oh yeah, the motor cortex is active now. So it's just this tool to give us a sort of deeper comprehension of what's going on than we could get by looking at the data itself.
And temporally, it's also a coarser description.
Yeah.
Of what's going on.
Yeah. So rather than at any given time point, this is happening. It's over this time, this is happening. It's a much broader look at things. We refer to temporal regularization, where the model doesn't want to switch too quickly between different states. It wants to be consistent.
How does this arise in the model? Because you're not enforcing this, right? Explicitly.
So we have 2 recurrent neural networks, and one of them is trained on the output of the other. And part of what that does is enforces simplicity in the model. And that simplicity comes over the RNN. And so it's, I keep on thinking of it in very human terms. It makes it reluctant to form a convoluted space. It wants to find the simplest solution. And sometimes that means that it's going to be bouncing around like crazy, but a lot of the time that means that you'll get these smoother changes between state activations.
So is that mainly because these 2 RNNs are trained on each other?
Yeah.
Okay.
It comes under the category of variational Bayesian inference. So we're essentially treating them as a posterior and a prior of the same distribution, and they force each other to stay sensible.
This part is also interesting because most deep learning is really just matrix multiplications.
Yeah.
But here in Mark's lab, there's often, well, especially with Dynamo, there's this push to be able to use Bayesian frameworks integrated into the deep learning framework. Why is this important for Dynamo and for modeling MEG data? Do you have an intuition on this?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that question. I should, but I don't.
That's fine. Until your Viva, you have some. But I mean, yeah, I guess it's not very clear to me.
Yeah, time to do some reading.
In broad terms, Dynamo, the way you described it, isn't it just a dimensionality reduction of the data? Yeah. All right.
That's exactly what it is.
And so it makes it easier for humans to interpret what's going on.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's not as as reduced as one of these like vector word embeddings, which gets you down to a 2D space from the space of all words, but and it still takes some knowledge to analyze what comes out the other end. But I guess it's designed in a way to fit within the preconceptions of neuroscientists. So, we produce figures out of it which will be recognizable to people who've read neuroscience papers in the past, and that's really important for communicating your work. And perhaps that influences the kind of models we design, because we need them to be able to fit within the analysis framework that people understand already.
Is it also a drawback, this kind of bias? Is it a limitation on the space of models, or on the space of stuff that you can extract from the brain data?
I suppose it probably is. Maybe there's some combination of deep learning and transformers and natural language models like GPT, where you could get a more sort of wordy description of what's happening without the need for a human to see some pretty pictures first. We plot these surface maps when we're doing our work, and they're great for people because most of the activity is going on at the surface anyway, and they allow us to visualize sort of like where that activity is. But if there was a model which more deeply understood what it was looking at, if it was more aware of the intricacies of brain structure, perhaps it would be able to, instead of a person looking at a picture and going, oh, there's a bit of red there and a bit of blue there, so I suppose maybe we're doing a visual task. Instead, maybe you give it to a model and it produces a nice wordy description where it says, the third fold of the XYZ cortex is activating, and this is linked to such and such a procedure, and it's also coactive with this. And maybe it can take a more complex model and convert it to something human understandable without having to have the human do the analysis in the middle.
That's super interesting. I actually never thought about that.
Neither had I.
But I mean, it sounds like a text description for images almost. Yeah. You take in the data and you just generate a natural language.
Yeah, like
description of it.
The data we look at isn't so different from images after all. We're just looking at 3-dimensional images in time, which is just a
video.
Yeah, exactly. It's a volumetric video.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess we don't have the kind of data that would be required to check, like the kind of pairing of MEG data and text descriptions, right?
Yeah, I think we're a way off at the moment.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that anybody's trying.
So I guess we'll stick to the pretty pictures then.
I suppose so. I do like pretty pictures, so it's fine by me.
What was the biggest challenge in developing this model, Dynamo?
Like from a technological or an emotional perspective?
Let's stick to technological.
Okay.
So for a bit, yeah.
So it's not a challenge which necessarily hindered me, but I think it's one that's worth mentioning, which is just that as these models get really big and complex, you need a huge amount of computing power to run them. So we use like top-of-the-line GPUs with gigabytes and gigabytes of VRAM. And that
40 gigabytes, to be specific.
Yes, 40 gigabytes, which is a large amount. And that's on a computer with, is it 1 or 2 terabytes of RAM? Like, an absolutely colossal amount. So we never bottleneck on performance. But the models that we develop, we have to be aware that not everybody has access to that kind of tech. And so we're producing something that is great for us and that we can analyze, and there are lots of people around the world who can train, but maybe not everybody who has good ideas about how to use it has that ability. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's really a good answer to the question, but it's an answer.
So is this a conceptual challenge
suppose
in how you design it to be able to not bottleneck it in the usability of the model, or?
Yeah, so I think we think a lot about usability. We write loads of documentation and try and make it as that a person who'd never seen it before, and I mean, let's not say a person who's walked in off the street, but a visiting neuroscientist who has walked in off the street would be able to pick it up and use it on their data set. And at the same time, there's just this huge constraint which prevents people from potentially being able to use it to its full effect.
You can plug in your GitHub repo here. Cell Dynamics.
Cell Dynamics, yeah, it's it's great. It's sort of superior code quality if you're not a fan of unit tests. We've made it robust with integration tests that we run individually ourselves. So
gives it stochastic, right?
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be too certain about what's going on. That would be no fun.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we would like to do, but just don't really have the person power or the time at the moment. It's not a focus for anyone.
It is how research labs operate.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah.
The quality of academic code is often questionable.
I'm actually interested in this a bit. How did you find the collaboration aspect in this Dynamo project?
So it's been through a few different sections, I guess, the collaboration. So we started off with a script written by Mark, which was, I think, a Jupyter notebook written in TensorFlow 1. And Ryan and I sort of dug through it, took out the nuggets of wisdom, and then built up a new framework around it. And for ages, we were just sort of bouncing back and forth between various notebooks, and it was quite a frustrating development experience, I guess. I hadn't really been part of any big development things before with multiple people. So I made a bit of a push to get it onto GitHub and to start collaborating actively and sensibly, like code standardization and stuff like that. And I think, like, at this point, we've really matured the pipeline. So we have multiple people who can review pull requests. We have one person who has the best view of everything, and he's really quick and careful and checks everything that comes through, at least with broad strokes. And
are you talking about chat?
I am talking about chat. And yeah, I think we've just got this really, really good framework at the moment, which allows us to be cautious but fast, and a really solid team. I think there's probably 4 people who commit fairly actively. It's really quite smooth. We make mistakes. We push to main every now and then, but it's a much better, much smoother process than it was when I started.
Yeah, I've been quite impressed recently, just looking at the documentation and the examples, and it's quite easy to use.
I think a lot of that
cool.
we need to be thankful for Chet. He's really taken on the robust code idea of the project, and he's run with it really well. And
you also have HMMs in there, so you can do baseline.
Yeah, we're trying to stop people having to use MATLAB as much as possible.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it's really cool. But you personally, how did you feel with the collaboration, or for your work? How was it for you?
So I think there's always there's always 2 different pulls with doing a PhD. The first is that you want to do good science, and good science comes with good collaboration.
Is it an assumption or?
I suppose it's an assumption.
Or a fact?
I'm sure that there are some people who work extremely well on their own and don't need to be teaming up with other people to do super high quality research. I don't think most people are geniuses. I think most scientists are just normal people with normal brains that just chug along through things. And one of the best ways of increasing your brain capacity is to add another brain. So I think, as much as there are inefficiencies that come with teamwork, there's also huge gains to be had. And so I think in general, it's probably right to say that good collaboration can lead to good science.
And this was the case for you?
Yes,
as well.
I think so. Like we've gotten much further by working with a good team than I ever would have on my own. That's for sure. There's people in that lab who know so much more than me about specific areas, and there's things I know more about. And that's what's important about the team, is covering a wider base of knowledge. But as well as that pull towards good science, there's also the pull towards finishing your PhD, writing a thesis. And your thesis has to be your own work. So if you've been really heavily involved in a collaboration, you have to pull out the threads which are you and form a coherent narrative.
So there are incentives which go against each other.
Exactly.
Slightly.
They work in opposite directions. And I think if you collaborate too tightly with other people, you can end up with a bit of a Swiss cheese for your thesis. There's sort of gaps where other people have done things, and maybe you can talk about those a bit, but they're kind of wasted words because you're saying someone else did this, and that's not really what your thesis is for. It's for, I spent 3 or 4 years doing this thing. This is the result of that time. And so I think, there's this, you have to take ownership of your part. Otherwise you lose that ability to sort of distinguish what you've done.
And maybe even from the beginning, I guess, keep this in mind.
Yeah.
While you're collaborating.
Yeah. So there've been a couple of times where I've gone to Mark in our meetings and said, I think that my remit is kind of getting swallowed up by other people's. I need to redirect and find out, I need to carve out my own space. And he's always really on board with that. He's always very understanding. It's kind of his job, but he's good at his job. And he's always been really helpful to me in finding these avenues that I can call my own, that I can stick my name on. And that's been really helpful. Because I think it is easy to get lost in doing things for the team and forget to do your own work. Yeah,
I guess that's what's very different if you're in a company, in a team in a company, where it's more like really a merging of minds to accomplish a single goal, and you lose individual contributions, whereas here you have to balance them to some degree.
I think, we in companies there's still lots of competition to prove your worth and get a paycheck, get a pay rise, or...
I think it depends on the type of company.
Yeah,
I think that
for sure.
You can find very different.
Yeah.
Well, this is a perfect segue into more personal stuff. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your PhD journey. We've obviously covered technical stuff, so I was more interested in Oxford life and your life during the PhD and how you.
So I guess it has been a journey. We've all been through a lot in the last 4 years or so. It's definitely been a challenge doing this kind of work during lockdown and everything. But I think everybody finds their own path, and I think I've spent long enough on this one I come in with a huge amount of enthusiasm for science and for like understanding things. And for me, it's been an exercise in keeping that enthusiasm for 4 years, despite the daily process of doing science. And, it ebbs and flows. And there's definitely been plenty of parts during my PhD where I've really lost focus, lost interest. And I think it's a difficult balance to, if you're in a normal job and you're in it for 3 years and you have some progression and then you quit and you find a new job, then you've gained 3 years on your CV. If you do 3 years and then quit on a PhD, you don't have a PhD.
you lost 3.
Yeah, you're someone who has been very, very severely underpaid for 3 years. And people look at your CV and go, oh, you did a PhD. Oh, you didn't finish a PhD. Why is that? And I'm sure there are plenty of good ways to answer that question, but it's still a question which is going to be asked of you.
Yeah.
And so I think it really ties you in a way that perhaps other fields don't. And I think that can potentially lead to a little bit of like self-resentment.
It's almost toxic now, this kind of tying yourself.
There's the potential to have a lot of people who are stuck doing something they're not massively fond of. And like I say, like it ebbs and flows. I've definitely been through periods like that. And then I have to find like a nice pop science book to read. Or a nice talk by a visiting biologist. Something which will give us like just a break from what we do. And remind me, no, we're part of a bigger whole. I am enjoying this. This is something I like. And finding those things which I'm good at and I enjoy. So for me, my PhD journey has been just been trying to stay focused, trying to keep enthusiasm, and hopefully coming out the other side with a better set of abilities, skills, and people having to call me doctor all the time. I will insist on it.
For you specifically, I guess. You like diversity, right? I mean, in terms of keeping your mind stimulated with different things.
Yeah.
So, I guess you already talked about this a bit, but how did you fit this in with the type of focused, specialized nature of the PhD?
Badly. If you speak to Mark about it, he will be able to tell you that I have meandered while I've been here. I try my best to stay on task and find myself getting lost in the details. I'll start working on like a specific analysis of the model, and then I'll look up a week later, and wouldn't you know, I've spent 5 working days trying to make a NumPy function 10% faster. So I find it really difficult to sort of lock myself into doing one thing at a time. I'm also very bad at doing multiple things at a time, which is bad. So like I guess I have singular but drifting focus.
So not in parallel, right?
No. Sequentially and non-directed. There's a high slipping.
Would you say you're very driven by curiosity in general?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be quite hard to do this kind of work if you weren't. Maybe that's...
but curiosity in an even broader sense, so outside your PhD topic, outside of neuroscience, is something that seems core to you.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I love knowing pointless stuff.
Yes.
And you know this.
Yes.
You've spent enough time with me that, barely a lunch break goes by at Ober when I don't come up with some, stupid linguistics thing. Would you like to know where the word XYZ comes from? And like random bits of like knowledge about Oxford or bits of nationalism about Wales, and yeah, I think that there's so much to know in the world, and there's no reason to know it other than for the joy of knowing it. It's not necessarily something that's going to lead to financial gains, like knowing where the word vinegar comes from,
which is wine and
sour wine. Yeah, I think it's Old French.
We learned today. Thank
you. But there's so much stuff in the world, and I like having a surface level knowledge of lots of it. It's fascinating, sometimes to dig deep into something, but I would rather listen to 20 like 2 or 3 minute talks from people who've done a PhD than like a 1 hour talk from
the same person.
Exactly. Like to me, it's about getting that initial like grasp and going like, damn, that's cool. Like you get that initial excitement and then you fall asleep in an hour lecture. Well, I do anyway.
I mean, when you put it this way, it almost sounds a bit like this trend of TikTok these days.
Yeah.
Of having 30-second, 1 minute clips of very different things one after the other. So
maybe this is it. Maybe TikTok has broken my attention span. I'm definitely an occasional scroller. And I think that these like infinite scrolling social media apps have probably worn away at my attention span a little bit. But yeah, no, I think it's...
But you were probably this way in general before.
I would have said so, yeah. Yeah. I don't think that TikTok is responsible. Yeah. I won't be suing them for damages to my brain.
So do you have a sense of where this is coming from? This general sense of knowing a broad range of things, but not very deep.
I think my dad's kind of the same. I remember, so I grew up in Sydney, and we took a holiday in Britain to like visit my grandparents and cousins and things. And I remember we had this little hire car, and we were driving around, just me and Dad, and I'd just ask him like whatever questions came into my head, and he'd always try and answer them. He never got frustrated. Well, he probably did get frustrated with me, but he never made me feel like I had frustrated him. He always like did his best to answer, and always helped me like continue to be interested in something. Like he's an engineer. He does like buildings and structures and stuff, but he's got, again, this like broad knowledge. He's got pub quiz knowledge is what he's got. We'd be a terrible team though, because we know a lot of the same stuff. So it's just kind of redundant. But yeah, I think he definitely instilled a lot of that curiosity in me. And I'm sure some of it's genetic and general upbringing, but yeah, I can see a lot of his traits in me, and that's definitely one that seems inherited. That's
really cool, because in my opinion, most kids probably have this, right? But maybe some parents are more fostering of this. Than
I feel thoroughly fostered.
Thoroughly fostered. Nice. If you're not comfortable with it, let me know. But I was wondering, are you diagnosed with bipolar?
Yeah.
How has this affected your experience in Oxford?
So, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Maybe what is bipolar?
Oh, sure, yeah. So bipolar disorder is where you have both depressive episodes and episodes of mania. So times where you feel sad and low, and also times where your brain races away. And I'm sure everybody kind of has that to some extent, has times where their brain is doing these like different modes. It's all on a spectrum. But with a person who's bipolar, that's a sort of more severe crash and a more uncontrollable mania. So I think it would be fair to say I've had this for like a long time. Whether or not it's all my life is something I don't know. But I got my first diagnosis of a depressive disorder in my third year of undergrad. And they stuck me on sertraline. And so that's an SSRI, just a standard antidepressant. And when I went on that, suddenly I was like manic for a month. And I went back and was like, is this what it's meant to be like? And they said, no, you have bipolar disorder, go and see a psychiatrist. Right. And so since then, it's just been about finding medication which works. And so I'm pretty well medicated. I found a solution which works fairly well for me, which is a combination of lamotrigine, which is a mood stabilizing drug, and fluoxetine, which is a different SSRI, but in the same category as sertraline. And I find that those sort of compress my mood a fair bit. I'm a more stable person when I'm on those than when I'm off those.
So is it about reducing the dynamic range of...
Exactly.
Nice.
And so like that can... The trouble with a lot of bipolar people, me included, is that mania is quite fun. Having your brain race away and having infinite energy is great until it stops and you realise that you've bought a nice camera and a car and no personal experience there, and you're suddenly exhausted because you've plummeted out of this like almost this high, and you come crashing down. And I think academia is probably a good and a bad field to have something like this. So on the one hand, I'm incredibly free to work in my own time at my own speed. And so when I'm manic, I do lots of work. And when I'm depressed, I do less work. Mm-hmm. My supervisor's been really good at helping me deal with those ebbs and flows and stay on top of everything. But at the same time, it's doing a PhD is 3-4 years of doing one thing. And it's a thing with lots of subtasks, but it's still one thing. And that can be quite hard to keep focus on if you're a person who has a brain which destabilizes in two different directions. So there are times when I'm manic where I'll get lots of work done, but it won't necessarily be useful work. Mm-hmm. And there's also plenty of times when I'm manic where my brain just doesn't really do anything. It's like having white noise for thoughts. But then when you're having a depressive episode, it's suddenly like, oh, well, now I have no energy. I've worked from 9 till 1. I've had a nice lunch break and I'm just exhausted and can't do anything. And in academia, you can go home. And I do. And that's a blessing and a curse. Because, I'll sometimes work in my bed and sometimes I'll sleep for the rest of the day, and it's completely unpredictable which one's going to happen when I go home.
Why is it a curse?
I forgot what I was saying. Why is it a curse?
I mean, the fact that you can go home.
Oh, when
you're in a depressive mood.
Because then I lose time and it doesn't feel like I have. So, if I was in an office, I'd probably, I'd probably just work through it.
Power through, yeah.
And not just that, but if I was going home, I'd probably need to mark it as sick leave. Whereas you can get through, 3 months of work in a PhD and not really notice that you haven't done anything. You can scrabble together your results for each meeting and go, yeah, look, I've had progress. But then you look back on it over months and you're like, damn, I have achieved nothing.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yes. It's a job which, like, your productivity comes in, I find, leaps and bounds. There have been months where I've achieved nothing. And then over the course of 3 days, suddenly all of the work I've done over the last 3 months will come to fruition. And I'll be like, wow, look at this, look what I've done. And then, that's such an amazing feeling. And then you go back, and you're like, oh my God, I'm back in the pits and slogging away. And what am I getting for it? And I think it's easy to lose track of the time that you lose. So during COVID, I didn't stop working. I did stop working effectively. And
so that means you used more time that would be necessary for...
Exactly. I did 6 months of work and I had nothing to show for it. And the university looked down very kindly upon me and gave me some retrospective sick leave. Basically being like, yeah, you weren't fully aware that your brain wasn't working properly, and that's understandable because your brain wasn't working properly. And this is part of the problem, is like this level of self-awareness. And I've definitely gotten better at it. I definitely am more self-aware of my moods now, but there's still plenty of people who spot them before me. It's just a case of that direct awareness. Mark always tries to get me to write down when I take off half a day or a full day, or I'm working but I'm unproductive. I'm absolutely rubbish at it. I always do like 3 days and then I have a week of good days and I forget about it completely. But I think that's, if there's people who are going through similar things, that's probably what I'd recommend is do as I say, not as I do. Write down your sick leave days.
Yeah, when you have to keep structure, how do you keep the structure of keeping structure?
Yeah. Qui custodis ipsos custodes. I never did Latin, it might show. But yeah, that's who guards the guardians.
What are some other ways that you've dealt with bipolar, other than medication and I guess your supervisor being understandable?
So I spent a little bit of time in talking therapies when I was at King's, and I found that useful for a few sessions, and then incredibly annoying after that. So I feel like it helped me get some like basic useful techniques down, and then every time I went, I just felt tired and miserable afterwards. And so I stopped going to that.
Was it too general?
I don't know. I just don't think it was for me. And I'm sure it's an individual thing between any given patient and any given therapist. But for me, the situation I was in really wasn't working. So I did that. I also just try and distract myself quite a lot of the time particularly when I'm in the low episodes. I clog my timetable. So I'll be, going out with friends every night and not going out, like going to the pub and having a lemonade like a responsible...
Oh, yeah. Sure.
A responsible person with brain difficulties. I know I'm laughing while I say it, but I do mean it. I barely drink anymore. But
does drinking exacerbate?
Yeah, absolutely.
The symptoms. Okay.
Sometimes. It's unreliable, but I think it's a definite trigger. But the other thing that I did when I came to Oxford was I started rowing. I've never been particularly sporty. I played a bit of cricket when I was growing up, and played football for the town team when I was like an under 6 or something. Bit of rugby in school, but I've never been massively sporty. And then I came to Oxford, and there's this thing that everybody does. Everybody tries it.
Culture, yes.
Yeah, yes, a culture
without the
without the and it's just a thing that you can throw yourself into so deeply if you want to, and in fact, if you don't want to, you tend to get dragged in. It's a bit of a whirlpool. But I promised myself when I moved to Oxford, I said, I'm not going to be one of those people. I'm not going to do rowing. And then I went along to a taster day because they had a barbecue, and lo and behold, 3 years on committee and countless races later.
Sounds a bit like a mini PhD inside the PhD.
Yeah, I definitely spent a lot too much time like on admin for rowing. Yeah, that's a definite criticism.
But how has it helped you then?
So I think physical exercise is like really important for people with mood disorders. It gives you a certain regularity. Like I knew I had outings on like Monday, Thursday, Sunday, often at stupid o'clock. So, waking up at 5:30 to be at the river for 5:45 and, it gets you to this place where you're super regimented with a certain aspect of your life, and that bleeds into the others, I find. I think it's both the routine that it gives you, but also, doing physical exercise releases endorphins and stuff like that, right? It gives you a little dopamine hit when you're doing well. And it's team as well. It's teamwork. There's always 9 people there, and you're always slogging at it together and going through the same pain and the same victories and losses, and it really binds you to those people. Some of my closest friends, even now, I've quit rowing. It got too much for me. Too much drama, too much politics. But even now I've quit, I'm still super close friends with lots of rowers from my club, and we move through the similar stages in our lives together, and we have this bonding factor that's external to that. And I mean, that's a really weird way of describing a hobby, right? But it's, we're all in university together. We're all, some of us doing DPhil, some of us doing undergrads, and we're all just sort of pushing through and finding something in common, which I think is always great for brains feeling good. Because, we're social animals. We exist in communities. And I think that's quite often hard to find. Maybe not in Oxford as much as other places. The college structure, I think, is great for pushing people together. But certainly when I lived in London, I think if it weren't for my course, I could have felt quite lonely.
Mm. Does that also increase, or is it helpful to always have people around with these mood disorders?
So I think same as most people. I have days where seeing people is great, and days when my social batteries are drained. And if I see people on a day when my social batteries are drained, chances are I'm going to feel real bad the next day. But equally, like a lot of the time, I think the same mood can be dealt with in different ways, and sometimes that way is ordering a Chinese takeaway and getting under my duvet, and sometimes it's going to the pub and having a rowdy evening. And I think both of those are equally valid ways to, for any given person to deal with their mood.
You mentioned colleges. How do you feel about Oxford life and colleges? And
I think it's really stupid.
One word, stupid.
It's one word, stupid.
Maybe more words?
More words, I suppose I can do. It's an amazing system.
Oh.
I know,
it's
right?
It's a bit of a contradiction.
A little.
Stupidly amazing or amazingly stupid?
Definitely amazingly stupid. So it's... I think there's so much tradition, right, which is lovely and very quaint, and I'm sure plenty of Americans come over and look at it and go, "Oh my God," they can't believe what's in front of them. There's something that people have been doing in this college for the last 500 years. It's older than their country, but at the same time, a lot of it is rooted in these traditions which just come from enormous wealth and enormous social disparity. And so, I'll find myself walking down Cowley Road where I live, past, like half a dozen homeless people who are suffering because society doesn't provide enough for them. And I'm on my way to a black tie dinner where a bunch of undergrads are, all dressed up and having an amazing time and enjoying the sort of the lavish side of Oxford, enjoying this sort of carefree side that exists in isolation to a lot of what's going on around it.
Or even a ball, which is even...
Yeah, I mean, there's balls here which cost like £250, £300, and I just think that's insane. I'm sure it's fantastic, right? I mean, the Christchurch one notoriously wasn't, but it's. I'm sure that it's. So I go to Kellogg, which is a new college, not new college, but a new college. Kellogg was founded, I think, in 91, so it's been around for just over 30 years. It's only slightly older than I am. And they don't have high table at their dinners. Everybody goes in, you dress nice, you don't have to wear black tie necessarily. The food is good. It's like reasonably affordable. And it's all just kind of normal. Like there's the college itself is 2 or 3 Victorian houses that have been sort of built together with a reception area and a cafe out the back. And it's marvellous. It's this sort of egalitarian place. It's all postgrads. So you don't get as many... you get a more balanced distribution of wealth backgrounds, shall we say.
Yeah. Sure.
There's less private school kids to stop dancing around it. And I think that's nice. It's not necessarily a better reflection of the world. It's still a very specific group of people, but there are more diverse backgrounds there. Particularly because we have a lot of mature students, people who've gone through their life, done multiple fascinating jobs, and then they come and study something like art history and indulge their passions for a while. So you go to a dinner at Kellogg and you'll have the principal on one side of you and a 75-year-old who's been working for, like, I don't know, a humanitarian agency for 30 years. And you just get this really interesting cross-section of like not just academia, but of people that you wouldn't necessarily come across in your day-to-day life as a 26-year-old. I like Kellogg. I like some of the other postgrad colleges, and I think
I should say that probably a lot of colleges have this aspect.
Oh, absolutely.
To be able to meet such a diverse range of people.
Yeah.
Right?
It forces people together from backgrounds that wouldn't necessarily mix. Like even...
We are talking postgrads here.
Yes. But like even as an undergrad at King's in London, which is just a non-collegiate normal university, most of the people I associated with were physicists. And physicists have a tendency to be more of one kind of personality type than another. Mm-hmm. Like, nerds. Yeah. And I think in the colleges, you're much more likely to be close friends with people who live in proximity to you or who are part of your college than part of your department. Having not been an undergrad here, perhaps that's a slice of life that I'm not totally privy to. But from what I've seen, it's a positive driver. It is just the history of them that bugs me.
Having done your undergrad in King's, which is a normal university, how did you feel when you got exposed to Oxford or to the college system?
It's a bit of a shock.
What were the pros? Because I feel like you've talked. Well, I guess the diversity is what you liked.
Yeah, I think I probably give off the general impression that I like being here, which I do. I think it's, as a city, a large part of it is dedicated to the university, and that's nice. As a student, I imagine it's very frustrating for the locals. But
locals? What are those?
Those are people who live outside of the inner mile of the city, which is obviously all student housing. But yeah, I think that it's a lot of the stereotypes are true, and that includes the good ones and the bad ones. There's a lot of privilege here, but also you'll be walking down the street and the people behind you will be discussing some specific area of ancient history, and then you'll cross the road and you'll find yourself being exposed to some complicated philosophical dilemma from someone else. It's, this city really just bathes in academic talk. It's kind of unavoidable in town, I find, and that's an amazing environment to be in.
Especially for you, like with this kind of curiosity, it must be very.
Yeah, it's great. It's like just constant satisfaction. Yeah. You get those 2-minute talks. The people don't know they're giving them, but you're still imbibing that.
Because, for example, obviously I went to some dinners and I met a lot of people, like you say, And to be honest, sometimes I do find it tiring.
Yeah.
To this kind of context switching, to do it all the time.
Yeah.
And like listen to a 2-minute pitch from someone about their whole research and work. So I am appreciative of it, but I guess I'm not, compared to you, I definitely felt overwhelmed sometimes.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think that when you go to a dinner with someone, or when you go to like an Oxford dinner and you end up sat next to someone, I always make sure that I don't ask them what they do first.
Right.
Because if I ask them what they do, I mean, some people are just happy to go on, and that's great. But a lot of people will just say like something short and then turn it back on you. And I would much rather hear what they have to say. So I always wait until they ask me. And I say, oh, I do like machine learning and neuroscience. What do you do? And then like, lots of questions. Try and keep the focus off myself in those situations. But I think it's easy to become quite exhausted when you're trying to take on all of the information that one person or like a small group of people are throwing at you.
I definitely found it overwhelming sometimes, overloading my brain.
Yeah. It's like, sometimes you go out for dinner and you just kind of want to have dinner. Like, you go with like 1 or 2 people and you want to chat with them and just have a relaxing time. And, you can have that for sure. But also people here are much, in the colleges at least, people like talking to each other.
Yeah, which is quite nice.
It is.
A bit more about, maybe last question about your PhD. What were your expectations before starting, and have they been fulfilled to some degree?
So I think my expectations were fairly minimal. I kind of just did a PhD in the sort of perpetual student default state. I didn't know what else to do. I think I had plenty of options, but I wasn't really ready to make a firm choice. Little did I know I was making one. But I think I expected to do 4 years of solid work, do something interesting, write a thesis and be done. Yeah. And I don't think I expected the level of variation in output. So, I think I expected a sort of constant, a linear progress towards the end result, when in reality it's really just like hills and valleys. And like literal valleys, like sometimes it goes backwards, right? You think you've done something and then you find out you haven't. Yeah. So I think I almost don't know whether I would advise people who love their subject to do a PhD or not. Because I think spending all of your time doing it is a sure way to like kill your enthusiasm if it's not actually a total love. So I think maybe it's, I think I went into this knowing that I was interested in what I was going to do, but not completely in love with it. And I think that interest has seen me through rather than the sort of emotional context around it.
So let me know if you disagree with this, but the way I see you, you're someone who's not really interested so much in greatness, but rather contentment.
Oh, absolutely.
Content.
Yeah.
Have you ever been drawn to greatness?
That's an interesting question. I don't think so. This is actually a conversation again that I had with my dad relatively recently. Both of us are people who are competent and do well at what we do in large, and have like not low ambition, but we have ambition to get to a place where we're happy. And this is kind of what I've seen in my studies. I don't care about being a well-known researcher. I don't care if people read, the 52 papers by Roberts et al. And come out the other side thinking, wow, this guy's a genius. I've worked with some of those people. They're cool. I don't want to be that. It doesn't attract me.
Right.
I think
you always knew this about yourself.
Yeah. I think I like being good at things. I don't mind not being the best. if that makes sense.
I guess it's still interesting to ask from your point of view then, do you have a sense of what's needed to achieve greatness during a PhD, for example?
I think hard work and a lot of luck.
What percentage?
I don't think it's a percentage. I think it's a flow. I think you put in a certain amount of hard work, and that enables you to be lucky. So like, you could be a person who puts in 100% hard work and never lucks out and never gets the big discovery. Maybe someone else beats you to it by a week. You could be the person who's super lucky but isn't willing to work for it, finds something amazing and sits on their hands for 10 years. So I think with academia, it's all about being in the right place at the right time, and you have to work to be at that place. Yeah, I think that I think you have to strive to be great, to be a great academic. I think you have to know that you want to be renowned and to put yourself in the position where that can happen to you, if that makes sense.
But you don't mean it in sort of a vanity way, like not just optimize for that.
No.
Right.
I'm talking in the sense of
being mindful of, or how do you mean strive, I guess?
So if you wake up when you start your PhD and you say, in 20 years I want to be at the forefront of my field, I want to be the best person at what I do, I want people to know that I'm the person to talk to. I think you have to, there's a lot of work in knowing your field and knowing which avenues are going to take you to interesting places, but also there's a lot of timing involved, right? So the striving comes from, waking up in the morning saying, I'm going to do as much as I can today to put myself in a good position, knowing that a lot of the field is a lottery. It's buying as many tickets as possible.
Okay, interesting. Taking opportunities.
Yeah. When
they come across.
Exactly.
Would you say you've dealt with some failure during your PhD?
Yeah, plenty. I think it's an inevitable part of it.
Can you speak to the role of failure and maybe even suffering?
Yeah. So
in life and in research as well.
In life and research. My biography title. No, it's. I think failure is inevitable. When you're working at the edge of something, when you're looking to define new things, the chances of striking gold every time you set out to do something are vanishingly small. And so always something that you try isn't going to work. And that might be a failure in terms of the thing that you are doing at that moment, but it's not a failure overall, right? The failures are a prize of their own. They teach you things. They teach you the roads that you shouldn't go down, or that you're not ready to go down yet. And they are just part of the journey. If you didn't fail, you didn't know it wouldn't work. I think there's some quote, maybe it's Edison or something, talks about, someone says, oh, how many times, you failed 1,000 times, why did you keep going? It's like, well, I failed 1,000 times, I knew 1,000 things that didn't work, and I found the one. And I think that's a really useful attitude. It's a hard one to maintain, for sure. It's easy to get despairing if you have 10 things that don't work in a row, but that's 10 things you know not to try again. And I think you can fall into suffering, you can fall into despair if you end up in that situation, but you can rescue yourself by keeping on going, just ploughing through. And sometimes it's a real slog. Sometimes it's just months and months of hard work for no gain, and that can be really depressing.
Can you find enjoyment in that? In the ploughing through part, in failure, in dealing with failure?
I think so. I think it's doable. I don't know that I always manage it. I think, it's very easy to get sucked up in the romance of, oh no, woe is me. I am the most unlucky person ever to have lived. But if you can find the energy to keep yourself focused and keep on track, like eventually you might get there. And breaking out into the light is a magnificent experience. And if you don't find the end of the tunnel, then you go back and you try a different spot. I don't think it's necessarily joyful. I think it's part of the process.
Yeah, we're going to talk about software engineering. I guess one last quirky question regarding PhDs. Do you think there are too many or too few PhD students in the world?
Oh boy. There's a lot of research to be done. And you need people to do that research. I guess that's two different questions, really. It's in the current system of financial activity in the world, does it make sense for this much money to be spent on PhD students? And also, in an ideal world, how many people would be doing research?
Yeah, that's a very good way.
And I think there are, in general, probably better uses for money than, a bunch of me's doing things like I'm doing, which, might go somewhere, might not. But also, if everybody was free to do exactly what they wanted, how many people are going to be, slogging away at Tesco when they could be doing this? I don't know if it appeals to everyone. I'm sure everybody has their own thing, but I think if everybody could do what they wanted to, we'd have more people doing PhDs. Maybe we should spend money on alleviating poverty in Britain before we do research on how to better analyse MEG signals, but I'm not sure that that's a direct trade-off. And so, I think there are a number of PhDs. I don't think there should be more. I don't think there should be less. I just think it's a number. And if there's enough money and willpower and people who want to do this stuff, then there would be more. And if there was less, there would be less. And that might be sad because some research wouldn't get done. But I'm not sure that there's a number that I could put on it, the number of PhD students there should be.
Well, do you think there are projects and research which is not useful, which is just done for someone to have a PhD, if that makes sense?
I'm sure there is. I'm sure that there's something out there someone out there that just wants to have doctor on their name and finds something to do. But it still advances the sum total of human knowledge. Maybe it's there are things that I'm not particularly interested in. I've got friends who study the history of literature, and I struggle to get invested in that. They're very interested and they talk about it very knowledgeably, and it's very cool. But I certainly couldn't spend 4 years looking at it. I'd go mad, more mad.
If that's possible.
Yeah, but I think that people's view on unnecessary is subjective, and it's easy as scientists even to view humanities research as unnecessary sometimes. But understanding where humanity's been is important, and understanding where it's going is very important. We can research climate change all we like, but if nobody's figuring out how to persuade people to care, nothing's going to get done. So I'm aware that that's a bit of an off-track answer, but it's I'm not convinced that there is any such thing as unnecessary research. Or if there is, I think all research is probably unnecessary. And it's just that we find ways to link it to practical problems.
Is there any advice you would give to someone aspiring to pursuing a similar path?
consider your options and don't do it just because it's the only thing you can think to do. Unless that's in a positive way. Like, if you're like, this is the only thing I can think to do, like, this is the only thing I can imagine myself doing, then sure, go for it. But appreciate that there are other avenues that you can take. It's not the only way to be involved in science. It is a very direct way of being involved, and it's potentially not suited to everyone. But it's an enjoyable thing to do, sometimes, by and large. But I think it takes a specific character maybe to get through. But yeah, like I think it would be good if every undergrad considered doing postgrad stuff at uni, and then that not all of them do, because there's myriad options available to people. So yeah, that would be. I think just consider your options and don't jump into it because you haven't thought carefully about what else you could do. But also, don't hold back. If you think if you think you've got something to give, if you think you can derive enjoyment from 4 years of studying a niche scientific topic or non-scientific, then by all means go for it.
To me, it just seems like we could do a better job at making sure that if someone's deciding to do a PhD, they really know what's involved. And I guess you never know what's going to happen, right? But I feel like there's so many people who have a bad experience or regret, or their expectations are not fulfilled during their PhD. It seems like if we could just, when those people decide to do a PhD, if they would understand better what's involved, maybe they would make a different choice, and that would be useful for everyone. Because then someone else could do that PhD who
yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really, really good point. So I think a lot of people will come out of their undergrad and just kind of assume it's going to be more of that, or like have this sort of, I'm going to say Euclidean, that's probably like the wrong meaning, like this sort of Euclidean ideal of what a PhD is. Like in its abstract form, they think they are going to go to a university and they are going to do science. And so much of it is dealing with other people and doing admin and
dealing with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you learn a lot about yourself when you just do the same thing for a long time. And yeah, I think you're right that a lot of people don't really understand what they're getting themselves in for. And I'm definitely included in that category. Like, I knew a bit, I'd talked to PhD students before I started. And almost without fail, they say, don't do a PhD. And nobody listens to them. And perhaps if universities listened more to PhD students when they leave, more people would be having better experiences as they came through. Because there's no end of people who are willing to tell you what's wrong with doing a PhD. So, yeah. I don't know if that's just an inherent flaw, though. Maybe it's not fundamentally fixable. Maybe it's just part of the process. Or maybe that's a generational trauma where the academics above did it that way, and so you have to do it that way too.
Yeah, I guess it could be part of the distribution, the error margins.
Yeah.
What is it about software engineering that attracts you? We've touched on this before, that you enjoy more the coding aspect than the neuroscience aspect.
Yeah. I like a challenge. I have been doing it for a long time, and so it kind of counts as a hobby for me. So I like accomplishing a task by doing something generally overcomplicated for what it needs to do. There's this general sort of thing of don't spend 2 days like writing a program which can do something that it would take you 20 seconds to do manually, and I will absolutely choose 2 days every time. My first like exposure to coding, I was in year 8, so I think that's like 12 years old. I might be wrong. It's been a while since I was that old. But I was doing a biology presentation for my class. My teacher, Mr. Robertson, was always very encouraging of like extra stuff, and I think I'm pretty good at being extra. So I not only made the PowerPoint for my presentation, I decided to teach myself how to write macros in Visual Basic. And so, it had a quiz and it skipped around from slide to slide and triggered various things to happen. And that was the beginning for me. I started off doing that, and then I was like, oh, well, Visual Basic also works outside of PowerPoint. So, I followed a tutorial on making a web browser. And various other tutorials on doing things, and very much like copy and paste programming. Like, I thought I was learning programming. In reality, I was learning how to look things up on Stack Overflow. Super valuable skill, as it turns out.
I would say it's the essence of programming.
Yeah, if you've got your strong Control-C, Control-V fingers, then you are set to go. But then I found out about Python, and I wrote a lot of code in Python. Just like, I got a Raspberry Pi. I started experimenting with like Pygame, just writing like, Snake, Pong, all of the classic 80s games. And just sort of progressed from there. Every time I thought of like something to do, I'd do it. I got to university, and because there wasn't really any coding, there wasn't any like software tuition at any of the schools I went to before university. I know that now there's more of it on the syllabus in this country, but when I did it, I thought about taking an IT module, and it was like, this is how you use Microsoft Access.
Yeah.
It was information technology, not programming. So I'm glad that there's a shift. I know a few primary school teachers, and they even teach. There's a language called Scratch. And you drag and drop things to make a thing go around on the screen. And so I'm glad that those skills are getting taught earlier. But in any case, when I started at university, we had a first year coding class, and they taught us Fortran, which is an interesting decision. My dad learnt Fortran when he was at university doing engineering. And back then it was probably the best option. And for high performance computing, it probably still is. It's like very close to the metal. It's a very low level language. But it's also difficult to understand, convoluted, and full of historical messes. They did start teaching us Python afterwards. And I think there's a really compelling argument for teaching people both C and Python. I'm not sure I would go for Fortran, though. Yeah. It's just got a few idiosyncrasies which are not useful when you're learning. But nonetheless, I did that. I got interested in learning other languages as well, and I'm rubbish at like modern languages. I can't speak French, German, Spanish to save my life, but I'm trying my best to be a polyglot when it comes to programming. So I went to an Android development course for phone apps run by the University Tech Society when I was at King's. So I learnt Java because of that. Went on a web dev course, learnt JavaScript, all the while getting better at Python. Learnt some C, some C++. Now my language of choice is Rust, which is, I think, up and coming would be fair to say. It's always the most popular language on Stack Overflow's dev surveys, but it's been around since 2006, I think, and is gaining popularity steadily. So I'm hoping that's going to be the next big thing, and I'm going to have, got a head start in the labour market.
What do you like about Rust?
It's easy to be right, or rather, it's not easy to be right, but it makes you be correct. in a programmatical sense.
Enforces it?
Yeah. So you have to cover every eventuality. And if you don't, the compiler will say, what are you doing? You're so lazy. Be better. For example, if you have a function which might return a value, or it might not, then the return type is encapsulated like that. You have an option around a thing. So your return type will be option float, or F32, which is, not Python. And then if you're processing that value, then you have to deal with the possibility that it's going to be none rather than some. And I found that since working in a language where that's true, Python gets really frustrating really fast because you never really know what data is being handed to you. And obviously that's part of the power of Python. It's really useful for doing stuff quickly, but it's also really easy to do stuff wrong. And I think Rust exercises a bit of my brain, which just really enjoys the idea that I have written this, I know it is correct, it will always be correct. There is nothing that can break this.
How is it different from C++?
It's more built into the language. So C++ certainly has a lot of this stuff. Rust has like additional memory safety things on top of C++. It's totally possible to write good C++ code. Like absolutely no denying that there are some really important programs that have been worked on by a lot of people and work really, really well in C++. It's a lot harder to write bad Rust code.
I see.
At least in my opinion. You're less like I've written many a Rust program and never had a segmentation fault because they don't really happen. The compiler spots when they could happen and it deals with them.
Is it a smarter language in some sense? Or does it?
I don't know if the language is smarter.
Does it make you smart?
No, it allows you to be dumb.
Oh.
Which I think is a slightly different thing.
Right.
It takes off some of the heavy lifting from a human of making sure that everything does what it's meant to do. And the compiler checks. It says, have you dealt with every eventuality? Have you allowed yourself to end up in a bad situation? And if you have, like, it won't pick up everything. But if you've got yourself into a situation which it knows is wrong, it will tell you and it will refuse to make your program. So it really lets you... The way I've heard it described is that you negotiate with the Rust compiler. You start off with a program that does what you want it to, and by the time you're finished, you've got a program that does what you want it to in the way that the compiler wants you to do it. It tells you everything that you need to know,
So there's some very clear boundaries in which you can operate.
Exactly. It's a reduced space for operation. It doesn't necessarily like hamper you, but it does make you reach for different solutions. It's got a really nice community as well. I've always found that the Rust forums are very welcoming, and it's a very active community. Lots of development, lots of there are a lot of people having very open discussions about the way things work. And I think that's really healthy for, like, in comparison to a lot of languages, which may be open source, but are old and convoluted and complicated. And a lot of the reasons that things can't change is because they've been like this for a long time and it would break things. And Rust doesn't necessarily have that problem as much.
It does feel like C++ is innovating a lot, though. Or introducing almost Pythonic elements into the language, which is quite nice.
Yeah, I think...
Obviously, you're not going to say this in Fortran.
Yeah, I mean, there have been lots of updates to Fortran.
Really? All right.
Yeah, I mean, they even put it in the file name sometimes, like F66 or whatever. For the version, I assume, that was released in 1966. I don't know. But a lot of the problems with C++ come with like modernizing. If you've got a C++ code base and you want to bring in new features, often it's just really, really hard to migrate, whereas Rust promises that their compilers are fully backwards compatible and tries to avoid regression. So if you are writing something in 2023 and you run it with the Rust compiler from 2027, it should still work fine. And you can just add new features rather than having to rework things sometimes. I think C++ is reasonable for backwards compatibility, but I don't know that I'm the best advocate. There's a lot of people online who'll try and sell you on Rust.
Called again. Called like. Is it called like?
So there's a YouTube channel called No Boilerplate, which I've always found to be, I mean, it's a cheerleading channel for Rust, but it's really good at sort of distilling the essence of what's good about it. So if anyone's interested in it, that would be my recommendation. Go and have a look at No Boilerplate.
What do you like about Python?
It's easy. I've been writing it for a long time, so it kind of feels like I think in Python at this point. If I was going to write pseudocode for something in another language, I would probably just write it in Python. It's very logical. You can read it. It's permissive, right? It lets you make mistakes and get away with it sometimes. And sometimes that comes back to bite you, but a lot of the time it means that the amount of thought you have to put into things is massively reduced. So I find that I can code as fast as I can write in Python because I don't have to think too much. There's no intermediate layer where I'm translating to something the computer will understand.
It's maybe the closest to natural language.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if, this is demonstrably false, but I wonder if there's a reason that ChatGPT and things is good at Python. I suspect it's more because there's a lot of Python in the training data sets. Yeah. There's just a hell of a lot of Python. I don't know what the percentage is, but I reckon that Python, JavaScript, and Java are probably up there at the top of the GitHub repos. There's a lot of Java in enterprise code, though. So.
Yeah, and the web runs of JavaScript, right?
Yep.
It's funny because my dad tried to teach me Python in the beginning of my undergrad. I didn't have Python courses, so he tried to teach me, and I hated it. I was like, "What is this? I don't understand anything." I was actually learning C and C++ in my undergrad. And then 2 years later, I picked it up and I fell in love with it on my own.
It's a phenomenal language, and the best way to write it is to write as little Python as possible. If you're doing something in science, chances are you're going to deal with lots of numbers and you're going to want to deal with them fast. And so you write in NumPy, which is C, C++. You maybe work in TensorFlow, which is C, CUDA. And there are all these really nice handles into other languages. I think Guido van Rossum, the guy who invented Python, I think he's referred to it a few times as a glue language. And I think that's a really good analogy. It binds together things from other places. So someone thinks of something that works and builds it and it goes really fast, and then you go, yeah, but what if I'd like to use that but easily? And Python steps in and says, here you go. And so, I think, the work we do, we spend a lot of time in NumPy and TensorFlow. So we're writing just the Python stuff, which tells these libraries how to behave. And so I think I'm incredibly grateful that people have spent so much time making such a slow language so fast by ignoring it completely.
That's exactly how I feel. Very, very lucky that there are all these frameworks like TensorFlow, which are already there and you can just use it. Yeah,
we've come in at the right time. We're very, very lucky.
But you could say equally that maybe it would have been better to come 5 years later when all you have to do is write English for GPT.
Yeah, getting there. I think we're going to be in a good place from having learnt to code and also know how to ask these machines how to do it. I think, the collaboration at the moment between humans and these, what we'll loosely call AI tools is a really, really amazing place to be at the moment.
If you were to design a programming language, what would it look like?
It would probably look terrible because I wouldn't be very good at it. But as for the features that I'd want, I like curly braces.
Would it have emojis?
Would it have emojis? Yes, because emojis are part of Unicode, and any good modern programming language should support Unicode.
No, but I mean, would the emojis have functionality?
Would they have functionality? No.
Like emotional programming language.
Oh wow, yeah. I'm sure that someone's done that.
Yeah, probably.
I feel like they would be hard to type, and that would slow people down. I like the idea of having, like maybe your program throws an error, and instead of writing error, you just have a poop emoji.
Yeah. So that would be a feature, maybe.
Yeah, that'll be it. It'll be Rust, but with that instead of errors. Yeah.
So yeah, what would it look like? What features would you want, or would you design?
I would want it to be fast and readable, which I think is something that like the Julia language aims to be, like sort of like Python, but also the speed of C and Fortran because it compiles down. I do like curly braces. I think that the white space of Python is fine, but the number of times that I've had a file which has like 2 spaces and then tabs for the rest of the file and Python throws a fit, it's an interesting design choice. So I like braces, and I would have those for everything. Strongly typed, probably, but with easy transmutation of variables. So, making it easy to coerce but explicit between different types. Mm-hmm. I think those are the things that matter to me the most.
I guess very object-oriented.
No, not necessarily.
No?
I think...
is Rust object-oriented?
Kind of. It's this weird halfway house. So it has structs like C. And you don't have methods. You have implementations on structs. So, I mean, they look like methods for all intents and purposes. But it's kind of this functional object-oriented hybrid, which I think works really well and just allows you to pick at any time which version you want to do. Because there are definitely problems which object-oriented programming is fascinating for, and there are things which functional programming is much more well-suited to. And I think, just like with languages, there's no need to be like a massive fanboy for anything and, to slander another language. I think you just appreciate that there's different tools for different jobs. And so if I need to do something in 10 minutes for a friend, I'll do it in Python. And if I need to do something in 10 hours for fun, then I'll do it in something else.
I think that's a very mature view to have on it.
It's a recent one.
I and probably many people share this, that the language that you're more familiar with, you're going to try to do everything in that, right? Fit the tool to the problem. Yeah,
exactly. I think that's a very common approach, and people get bogged down because the more you do that, the more you do that, right? It's because you end up practicing the tool.
Yeah.
And so you're sat there like, damn, I'm so good with a hammer.
Feedback loop.
Yeah, this pane of glass is looking awful nail-like. And then you end up like hurting yourself because you're really trying to just wedge something in where it doesn't go. And you'll come up against a problem at some point that is too hard to do in Python, or too slow to do in Python, and that you actually benefit from being able to manipulate memory more directly. And that's when you should change. Like, when you feel that you've drifted out of the scope of your original language, just keep an eye out for it and figure out what other people use. Maybe there's a library in JavaScript which does it and not one in Python. So write it in JavaScript.
Yeah. Or use GPT-4 to translate the JavaScript library.
It is remarkably
to
good.
Python.
There's so in VS Code, there's the Copilot menu on the side, and they have brushes, right? The translation one is great, but I found the custom brush is absolutely incredible. So you type something, and you tell it what to do to your code. So it could be something simple like take this function, replace all instances of the variable hello with the variable world, and obviously VS Code can do that for you in non-stupidly overcomplicated ways.
Yeah.
But there are you can use natural language to manipulate what you've already written, and that is phenomenally interesting to me. You'll sit there and you'll say, well, there's this function that does this, but what if it did that, and what if it did that, and you put it into ChatGPT, and then you've got to copy it back across, and you probably miss something. Whereas this, just like you wave a magic wand and it's done.
I didn't even know about these brushes.
Oh boy, I'm going to show you about this afterwards. It's amazing.
I missed out. What?
Yeah, it's incredible. So it's part of Copilot Labs, not just Copilot. So there's robustness brushes, there's testing brushes, there's readability brushes, and this custom one which allows you to do whatever you want. It doesn't always work perfectly. And it works better on Python than other languages. But it is the easiest way to modify your code. Sometimes you have to tell it not to modify it too much, which is a bit frustrating.
That's interesting.
So, you select your code, you apply the brush, and at the end of your custom thing, you say, do not modify the function in any other way. Otherwise, it decides to cut it off and replace it with 100 lines of documentation for some reason.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a tool, and it takes time to learn to wield it.
It's a really cool tool.
It is.
To linger on this, how do you think GPT will affect software in the future and writing software? So
I'll talk from personal experience because I've used a lot of it. I use Copilot a lot. I have it installed in the various different IDEs that I work in. And I find myself turning it off quite often now. It's really good for mundane stuff. And sometimes for complicated things that I couldn't initially figure out on my own. So, I like that you can get stuck on a problem, think about it for a while, figure out exactly what you need it to do, write a comment, and then it'll finish the function for you. I think that's fantastic. And it's definitely cut down my work time a lot on things that are surface level complicated and that there are actually quite simple solutions to. And I could feel myself getting quite reliant on it. I'd just be typing along and then I'd see something that looked kind of half right, press tab, let it fill it in, and then go, actually, not quite, and correct it. And that often takes a lot less time than thinking about the problem.
But not always.
Not always. And I find myself sometimes getting frustrated more than anything that it is giving me suggestions that are wrong. And so I find myself turning it off and just working through stuff manually and actually finding the grunt work more rewarding because I know I'm doing it on purpose. Mm-hmm. I think if you have to write 10 functions that do vaguely similar things and it's going to take you 30 minutes, if you have to do that, then it's like, oh my God, this is so boring. Why am I doing this? But then if you know that there's a tool that could do it and you're choosing to do it because you might do it better, I think actually that's a vastly different experience, for me at least, which has, I think, increased my enjoyment of what I'm doing. So I think it's bound to have really big impacts on certain sectors of the software development market. I think for web dev in particular, it's going to be crazy impressive how much it gets done. I'm not worried about it taking my job yet. but I don't know that we're that far off. So for the time being, I see it as a useful time-saving tool sometimes. It just takes a bit of mental load off.
Is there a near future where programming, software engineering will transform fundamentally into, well, what we are seeing glimpses of already, using more natural language and maybe moving completely to some kind of natural?
Yeah, I think it's plausible. At the moment, I see a lot of things that need a lot of direction from people. I've been reading a little bit about auto GPTs in the last week or so.
Fascinating.
Yeah, they seem pretty cool. And the idea of self-healing code where you write something and then you give it to one of these models and it fixes the problems with it until it's done. I think that's it's a potential future for software development. And I don't see a problem with that necessarily. It'd be frustrating for me because I've spent, years honing a particular set of skills. But it's also, if that's where technology goes, then that's where technology goes. And it's going to be a lot less harmful to people around the world to lose software developers than it is to lose lorry drivers. There's a smaller section of the economy. But I think we need to think really carefully about society as to where we're going. Not to restrict the use of this technology, maybe. We need to be careful with it. We need regulation. But I think we need to think about how we are going to look as a species if these changes happen. Are we going to let people who have the skills that are getting taken by the robots, and are we going to let them live in the gutter, or are we going to lift them up and use these new technologies to help them? Because if it's not for everyone, it's not a revolution. If it leaves the poor behind, it's not a revolution for me. We need technology that will help humanity, not technology that will help the 5 richest men in the world become richer.
Widen the gap.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need to be cautious, but I'm cautiously optimistic that it will be useful rather than detrimental.
In terms of software engineering, what attracts you more, a big company or a startup?
Ooh, I don't know. I think the answers maybe are different depending on which aspect of my character we're talking about. I like the idea of being a small cog in a big machine. I like the idea of writing a tiny bit of a big project. I like the idea of going to work at 9 o'clock, doing my job and leaving at 5. And I think potentially you get more of that from being, a software engineer at XYZ Megacorp.
Yeah.
But I also like a little bit of self-direction, and I like having the opportunity to shape what I'm working on, not just write it, but think about it. Maybe get more of that from a startup. So I don't know. Maybe there is a middle-sized company which will suit me well. But I could definitely see myself going down the startup route when I finish here. As long as they were doing something which was interesting enough that it kept me there.
Maybe switching between the two, do 1-2 years here, 2 years there.
No, I'll just find the highest paying, sketchiest job that I can, do it for 3 years and retire at 29, 30. It'll be 30 by the time I've done 3 years of anything. Yeah, that's the dream, right? Let's live on an island for the rest of my life. I'd find that so boring.
So, it's interesting what you say in terms of having someone to tell you what to do and being self-directed. Maybe you can you expand a bit more on that? What are the in your experience? How do you feel about that? Having the freedom to do whatever you want versus getting directions.
So I think the problem for me with having the freedom to do whatever I want is that I will often do very little. If I have like directed goals, I will complete them. And if I have something open-ended, I might meander around a particular valley in the search space and get myself lost and confused. I think I am more efficient. I think I work better when I have small, specific, like goal-oriented things to do. You know, your boss says, write code which does this by Thursday afternoon, and you get on and you crank through it for a few days and then it's done. As opposed to the open-endedness of academia in particular. Yeah. You know, like, oh, we might write a paper about this at some point in the next 3 years.
So if you were a neural network, you would need short-term objective functions.
Yes, I
in
would.
order to work on.
I would need a series of one-shot trainings to yeah. No, I'd need to be very carefully guided. You know how you can write these like GPT prompts which add incremental detail? That's what I need.
You will need to be prompted well.
Yeah. I might have an overall goal, but it's best if you tell me what to do at each step as well.
Think step by step.
Yeah.
And this is one of the prompting techniques.
Yeah.
ChatGPT. Do you think GPT will one day be able to do research? Or, a future version
of
GPT?
I guess we have to think then what research is.
Well, that's the previous question.
Yeah. So...
Thank you for asking.
I think that the majority of what goes on in science is understanding everything that's gone before. And humans take a lot of time to read things and to be told things and to understand things and to process them in useful ways. And so I suspect that the idea of a literature review could be quite easily done by maybe GPT-5. You know, that it can understand enough of a field to tell you what's potentially important. When you add into that the ability to create new ideas, I guess it depends whether you think that's emergent from the knowledge of previous experiments, or if you think that creativity is some uniquely human trait and that actually these models are just predicting the next word and don't really have a way to do it.
So there's an assumption there that creativity and maybe intuition plays a big role in scientific discovery and research in general.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, again, it's that like slogging to the point where you're lucky. It's slogging and building up your knowledge base, your experience, to the point where you can think of what the next thing might be. And at that point, I don't know if it's more inspired creativity or just pattern matching, and seeing where the gap is. Because a lot of science now is very specific and very small. And so the job of a lot of these like high-flying academics is to figure out where the gaps are. So I wonder if maybe it would be useful for that sort of thing.
For gap filling.
Gap filling, yeah.
Maybe that would enable scientists more to focus on more ambitious.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if when you started your PhD, you ran a literature review through your special AI engine and it tells you these are the top 10 bullet points that I have surmised from a review of all literature on the subject. And then it gives you the first 20 papers you should read. And then you go on to each paper and it gives you a summary of, like 2 paragraphs. and assuming it is correct and not hallucinating, then, maybe we're looking at a situation where the processing of old knowledge becomes so much faster that human brain power is just released to be used on more things. What if you used more than 10% of your brain to think about the new stuff rather than getting stuck down and reading papers all day?
So I guess you could argue that in that case, GPT is already doing part of the research, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's 90%, then it's actually the majority.
Yeah, I think it's...
I mean, research is a funny word, no? Because it has research in it.
Yeah.
So, and researching.
I don't know if it comes from to look again. That would be interesting.
But it's fitting in terms of literature. Even.
Yeah.
But do you think creativity is fundamentally human, or is there something missing? Do you have an intuition on what's missing?
I see no reason to believe that it's human. I can see it potentially being an emergent property of a complex thing, and if we're building complex things, maybe they will also exhibit the same properties. And like the words that you say are just based on the words that you've previously said, and the words that you've previously said are based on the things that other people have said to you. And humans are just this big blob which takes in information and packages it up ready to send out again.
Black box.
Yeah, we don't understand how a lot of that works.
Tying back into neuroscience.
Yeah, relentless. And yeah, I can see it being quite difficult to tell whether an open quotes, close quotes AI is creative as opposed to just knowledgeable, and whether that creativity falls out of the knowledge or whether it's something which is required on top to produce new insight.
Would you say a good test would be to prompt GPT-5 with a specific topic within neuroscience, for example, and to just say, produce original research, here's all the literature, and just, let AutoGPT do its job. And if the end result is a paper, and that paper gets reviewed and accepted somewhere, would you say that's evidence for creativity right there?
Maybe, yeah. I don't think it would be proof. Because it might just be that it's analysed everything and found the gap. And at that point you have to ask yourself, is it human creativity? Or is it just humans pattern matching and seeing something missing?
But there's some creativity, I think, in finding the gap and also being able to filling it.
Yeah, I guess this comes down to how you define creativity. It's we
don't have the words.
Yeah, I guess like novel thought. Is your brain synthesizing something that isn't a guarantee given the inputs it already has? So is GPT creative? I don't know. Are humans creative? How are you defining that? It seems like the logical answer would probably be yes. We've done lots, but I think when people have an easier time reasoning about this when it comes to image generation. People look at the images that come out of Dolly or Midjourney, and they say, I can see the influence of this. I know that this has been trained on all of the art produced by these people, and it has synthesized something new. And I think people have a harder time thinking of that as a creative process, or at least I do. For me, that's a very, you have been told what art is, and now I've asked you to make art, and you have made art. And I don't know if that's inherently creative. But I don't know that that's different from what people do.
It's interesting because I would have said it's more clearly creative in image generation. Like these kinds of images that it can generate.
Then I think there was a thing a little while back where Dawley, or maybe one of the other ones, who knows, there's so many, was asked to make a picture of an American football game. And it very clearly put Shutterstock logos, like mangled Shutterstock logos, but Shutterstock logos. And that's not, an artist wouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's an artifact of the training data.
Yeah, but that means that it's not understood it.
Yes.
Because it said, this is American football. I can tell it's American football because it has a Shutterstock logo.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't call that creativity, you'd call that a mistake.
But is that at the language level, the confusion? Does the model... no, I guess it doesn't matter where it is.
Yeah, it's just this, we have a complicated thing which has learnt the wrong thing. And goal definition in AI models is so complicated. Knowing how to tell your algorithm to do the thing you want it to without doing the things you don't want it to is difficult.
Yeah.
There's another YouTube channel recommendation, Robert Miles, who used to do some videos with Computer File, and he talks about AI safety and
this is also called AI alignment, right?
Yes, exactly. And AI alignment people think of as is it good or evil? But actually, it's how good is it at doing the thing we've told it to. An AI can be badly aligned without causing world destruction. But the example that I think he gave was, I think this is from someone else before him, but if you give an AI the task of collecting as many stamps as possible, and it runs out of stamps, what does it do? Maybe it takes over a printing facility and prints stamps all day, and it's got to earn money to do that. And so it, gets a job doing something and then produces more stamps and then uses all of the trees in the world to produce more stamps. And the trees aren't good enough. And what's left? Biological material. I guess we'll process humans into paper.
Yeah.
Humans become stamps.
Very classic
example, yeah. It's, perhaps a little convoluted, but I think it's basic enough that people understand it. You don't need to get to the step where humans are being chomped up to make stamps to be misaligned, right? Because when people are collecting stamps, they're interested in getting all of them, but not all of the stamps, a lot of different types of stamps. And if you don't explain that properly, then it's your fault. But it's really difficult to explain things properly because they're not humans.
Yeah.
They're trying their best, as it were, to humanize them, to understand what we say, and we don't know how to talk to them.
Well, in an ideal case, it should be an average of all humanity, because I guess there is a distribution. If you say if you tell this task to a random selection of people, there is a distribution of how people would accomplish this. And maybe some people would go as far as building factories. Maybe some would just collect 10 stamps and that's it, or ask their friends for stamps, or, So because it's trained on data from all people around the world, it should be an average, ideally.
Maybe, but I think some of these things it's hard to find an average because they are discrete by nature. There isn't really a continuum between not using humans to make stamps and using humans to make stamps. Those are two choices. And I would assume that the average human would probably go for not using humans to make stamps, as a guess.
Yeah.
But also, to say the average human, because it uses data from all over the world, is another thing, right? Bias in data sets is real. There's a lot of people who have access to the internet, but there's a lot of people who don't. And there's a lot of people who write things on the internet and a lot of people who don't.
Yes.
And not all of the people who shout loudest are right. And there are plenty of countries which would be underrepresented, and plenty of minority groups whose views would get squashed if we just looked at the average. And so I think we have to be really cautious about things like that. But it's also hard to get rid of.
It's not the real average.
It's sampling.
Sampling, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's in terms of alignment, there's actually two issues, isn't it? Because one of them is being able to describe accurately what you want to accomplish, and the other one is the agent understanding your description.
Yeah, they're related but distinct problems.
Yeah.
And so perhaps what we really need is an AI which is capable of spotting ambiguity and asking for clarification. Maybe that's what we really need.
Well, often people also come up with the term common sense for this, which is such a... it's not a useful term.
No, not at all. Because common sense varies from person to person. Yeah. I probably have a different common sense to someone who's grown up on a farm in Texas. And someone who's grown up on a farm in Texas probably has a different common sense to someone who's in a refugee camp in Yemen. There's
I mean, you share some common sense.
Maybe.
But, yeah.
We have similar basic needs. We need food and water and shelter, and sometimes those aren't provided. But maybe there's so much diversity in what works. Because for me, common sense tells me that having a firearm in my bedside cabinet would be really dumb. Because they're illegal in this country, and nobody who tries to rob my house or anything is likely to have one. But maybe if the farmer in Texas, maybe it's a long way to the nearest police station, and someone's been stealing his sheep, and so you can ask the same question, and the context changes so dramatically.
I would push back on that and say that you share the common sense. It's just situational. Like if you go to Texas, maybe you would keep a firearm. If that farmer comes to the UK, maybe they wouldn't, right? So I feel like there is a deeper shared common sense there.
Yeah, I can appreciate that point. But I think maybe that actually is the deeper point we're trying to get at, which is that the AI doesn't necessarily have the context.
Yeah.
And so, you can ask it, should a person have a firearm in their bedside cabinet? And it can say yes or no. It might give you more detailed reasoning, but if you tell it which of those situations you're in, then you're giving it more of an opportunity to align with your goals. There we are. I made myself sound right.
Yeah, because it just gets a prompt. That's the issue. And since it's not a singular person with a consistent life and experiences, it's like this amalgamation. So it doesn't know in which context it is.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why people come up with this kind of prompting techniques that's really all about providing more context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're learning how to talk to it.
Yeah.
Learning how to get it to do what we want. And some people are getting quite good at that now, which is probably good for all of us.
Yeah. It's like learning how to talk to all of humanity in a condensed form.
Yeah, it's
in some sense.
It's its own language in a way. We speak English to it, but it speaks lots of different languages, and under the hood, it's sort of understanding that conceptually, and it's just finding the right sentence which translates into essentially a program that it's going to execute. It is natural language programming, and that's obviously going to be complicated.
Yeah.
I hope we see a lot of progress there, because we could find out some really amazing things if we have a good way of not controlling but working with these programs.
Well, you've talked about emergence. I wonder if, with your physics background, can you comment on, is there some parallels between emergence in physics systems and potential emergence in intelligence in general, in GPT?
So obviously I think it would just be like speculation. But I think that systems get to a point where, like I was saying with biology earlier, where you just you can't understand all the factors. There's too many things going on. And it just sort of surpasses your ability to analyze. And maybe these systems are going to be like that. Maybe they are going to be so complicated that the things that are going on are, like, they're governed by rules. They're governed by processes which would be individually understandable, but which, when combined, cause us to interpret what we're seeing as intelligence. Yeah, I guess, yeah. I would expect to see some kind of emergent effect from the sheer complexity of these systems.
You know, I just wonder what your reaction will be to this. Can you explain what astrophotography image analysis is?
I'm trying to think what you've read. Is that on my GitHub profile? Where have I written that?
You have a GitHub website.
Okay. Wow. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so my astrophotography is taking pictures of space, and analysis is analysing things.
Yeah, I meant more like...
What did I do?
Yeah.
So in my third year for our bachelor's dissertations, we were given a project book of things to do, and one of them was a little bit eye-catching, and I think was quite heavily applied for, and I was very lucky to get it. And that project was working with Professor Malcolm Fairbairn, who's, again, at King's. He does, if I remember correctly, dark matter physics. Very, very smart man. He's an enjoyable person to spend time with. He's an interesting person. And I enjoyed working with him so much. But his project was that there is a telescope on the roof of King's College London on the Strand, a pretty nice one, in a little observatory dome, and we were trying to take pictures of things. I don't know how much you know about taking photos of space, but when it's bright out, it's hard. And in London, it is quite often bright, quite often cloudy, and quite often full of pollution. And so we had a really difficult time. All of our photos would be quite like saturated, high gamma values, I think is the term for that. Lots of white across the image. So also like the weather, because you're in Britain. I mean, London's drier than a lot of the country, but it's still cloudy a lot of the time. And so we would wait for weeks and weeks through cloud, and then Malcolm would send us an email going up to the roof tonight, hoping weather's going to be clear at 2 a.m. Come if you can.
That sounds fun.
It was amazing. I cannot imagine having enjoyed any project more than that one. One of my flatmates was doing it too. We had a great time. And yeah, it was just this like unique experience to be up on the roof of the university late at night, early morning. Nobody else is around. London's as dark and quiet as it gets, which is not very. And yeah, we took photos of space. We took pictures of Jupiter and its moons, and I think we got Mars. We took like spectral profiles of Betelgeuse. Got a shot of the Crab Nebula or something. I can't remember. It was a while ago now, but it was a lot of fun. And we got we were basically just using Python to try and do like segmentation and things on the images, figure out where the stars were, decrease the contrast for everything else, and calibrate the telescope. That takes a long time, helping it to figure out where it is, what it's pointing at, and particularly when there's not really any features in the sky because it's just a blurry mess. But yeah, he's got a website as well. I think it's something like Dark Skies London, but he still details all of the things they're doing because there've been a few students have done that in the years since. That was an enjoyable time. I liked astrophotography.
Are you familiar with this new telescope, the James Webb?
Yeah.
Space telescope? I've been so impressed by the images.
So I can't say I know a huge amount about it, but it's gorgeous, right? The images that come out of that thing are just spectacular. Like they have to fill you with wonder and awe, I suppose. And it's the culmination of so many scientists doing so many things for such a long time. They've been building it for like a decade, probably longer. And then the thing that people are interested in is, why are the stars different shapes? And that lets you teach them about something, because the stars are different shapes because the mirror is made of I think it's hexagonal panels, and so they have 6 spikes, whereas the Hubble ones had 4 spikes because it was a square mirror, something like that. And it's this kind of complicated physical phenomenon, diffraction, and it's obvious to people when they look at it, and it's the first thing they spot, and they go, well, why do the stars look different? And I just love that. It's something which speaks to people, and it makes them curious.
It presents reality in a different way.
Yeah. People realise that they're looking through a weird camera, but a camera nonetheless.
Yeah.
And that's... Yeah, I think that's what a lot of scientists hope to achieve, is to make people to make people know what the question to ask is.
Would you say you did a scaled down version of the James Webb Telescope?
If you need a title for the episode, yeah, sure. Junior James Webb Telescope engineer Evan Roberts. No, it was a lot of fun, and I got a good mark for it, but I'm not sure it was particularly scientifically valuable.
Do you miss physics?
Yeah, I think so. I try and keep myself loosely engaged. I know lots of people still doing physics PhDs, and I like talking to them about their research. And I think they like people who have enough understanding that they don't have to talk at a complete layman's level, but also not so much that they try and interject all the time. So I think I'm a happy audience for a lot of people who are studying physics still. And that works for me because I like people telling me about the cool things that they're doing.
What's the most interesting in physics?
The most interesting thing in physics, full stop.
For you?
For me.
Right now.
Right now, at this moment.
At this point, I guess, yeah. I'm asking your current self, yes.
No, ask me in the future. I think particle physics is cool. I like that it doesn't quite work. Like the standard model, this really amazingly well-researched thing, and it's it doesn't quite explain everything. And so there's all these, wild theories like supersymmetry and loop quantum gravity and stuff like that, and it's string theory. All these competing, sometimes untestable ideas, and it's physics, but it's messy. And the same with all the interpretations of quantum mechanics. Many worlds, Copenhagen. I like it when there's the need for people to try to understand what's happening, where the maths isn't quite enough, where there's different conceptual solutions to the same equation. So I think that's what I like.
Can you explain a bit how human understanding and conceptual understanding comes in physics
Sure.
as an addition to math, because the way I understood it is, it's very math heavy, right?
Absolutely.
Quantum.
Yeah, quantum is interpreting mathematics, and it's super difficult to understand, and it takes a long time, and I definitely don't understand it. But so on top of the mathematical equations which define the things that we know about the various fields that interplay in quantum mechanics, there's these different interpretations. So the many worlds hypothesis says that every time something can be in one of two states and you observe it, both states continue to exist, but they're in different universes, different. I don't even know what the word is to describe it, but this is like the multiverse sort of idea.
Yeah.
And
they're
people
both real in some sense.
Exactly, they both continue to be, but they are disconnected from each other, and so nothing is lost. It's only transferred. It's only put into different buckets.
Yeah.
And then there's the Copenhagen interpretation, which essentially says that when you observe something which is in a superposition of different states, it probabilistically selects one, and the world continues like that, and that other information is gone. And as far as I'm aware, as someone who only has an undergrad in physics, these two ideas both kind of work with the maths. They're just different ways that people interpret it. And they have, sort of profound implications for what the world really is. Are you just the current branch of an incredibly branched universe, which has continued to develop in specific ways, and are all the other versions of yourself out there having made different choices and having different things observed in the universe? Or are we the only one? Are we the victims of probability, and every time something has happened, it's happened because God plays dice with the universe?
To use big words.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's Einstein. He was a smart bloke, but he wasn't a...
Well, he said the opposite, no?
Yeah, he said God does not play dice with the universe, because he didn't think that the sort of chance nature of quantum is a reasonable thing to expect of physics.
Well, I've been listening to some stories about Einstein, and it's crazy how wrong he was on a lot of things. Like, I think, he didn't accept the quantum stuff and on gravity, and it's just funny.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has blind spots, and one of his most famous ones is the expansion of the universe. Right? He looked at I think relativity and the equations of gravity and said, well, if this was true, the universe would be expanding, but it's not. So I'm going to add in a constant, and actually, it turns out the equations were right. The universe is expanding. And the constant was wrong. Yeah. But that's kind of how science works. It's not in a vacuum. It's channeled through the experiences of every scientist who works on it. And people do make mistakes.
Well, I feel like at that time in the past, it maybe came even more from a place of intuition.
Yeah.
Like, I guess the further you go in the past, the more intuition played a role. Whereas nowadays, I think people are very aware of not to use intuition, right? Would you say that's true?
I think people are aware that they shouldn't, but it's kind of unavoidable. You always have the biases in your brain. You always have the easy route where your brain skips the decision-making steps and goes, I know this. And it's just a solidified thought in your head. Yeah. And you don't know where it's come from. It's just... through my some knowledge and experience in life, I have determined that X. And separating that, like you often find, I think when you're writing a paper, you go, I know this thing. And then you like look through the literature to find the person who says it. You're like, I can't find it anywhere. Maybe this is just me, but I'll have like a fact in my mind, and I'll say I want to say this to back up what I'm trying to claim, and I'll look for it, and I won't find it. And I'll think, well, have I invented this? And it'll turn out I am completely wrong, and it's actually the total opposite. And it's only through that like introspection that comes from having to write down what you think, and having to evidence it, which is so key to science, that we end up actually checking ourselves and thinking and coming to correct conclusions rather than the ones that have filtered through us.
Yeah. It's interesting, this intuition, just to linger on it, because it seems like, compared to like GPT, our normal thoughts maybe are more like word prediction, and our normal like decision making and thought processes. But intuition, like you say, it's this coming from nowhere kind of jump, which is not really, you cannot say it's like prediction of the next word.
I suppose it's like something bubbles away under the surface and then comes into your head. Like the number of times that you'll be, or that I will be in a conversation and I'll say something and I'll have no idea why I said it. It's just, I'm not sat there thinking, what is my next word? I'm just talking, and the things are coming out like it's happening now, right? I'm not considering every next word that I'm going to say, but my brain is nonetheless putting them out of my mouth. And I think that when you're
not using intuition right now.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, that's exactly.
But when you, I guess then we're asking if intuition is the conscious part, where you have to like put ideas together consciously.
It seemed unconscious to me.
Yeah, I guess like whether or not our brains are doing word prediction, I think we have to accept that there's a large amount of thought in our head which is not controlled by us, where we are our conscious selves. There's a lot which happens below the surface.
Yeah, we are the observers.
Exactly. We think of ourselves as maybe sometimes we think of ourselves as a brain in a flesh skeleton. We're in our little mech suit. But in reality, the conscious part of your brain is really just along for the ride as well. And sometimes we get control, and sometimes our brains and bodies just do things, and we have to form a narrative around that for ourselves.
That's weird, isn't it? I wish neuroscience would be a better place to look into this, to be able to answer this.
There's some quite cool studies, unfortunate but cool studies around people who had their corpus callosum severed for like epilepsy treatment and things like that. Where their brains essentially, where their brain acts as if it is two separate objects, because it is. And one half is doing one thing, one half is doing the other. They're connected to different bits of visual processing, and one of them will do something and the other half will make up a story for why that happened, and it will fully believe it's true because your own hand just did it.
Yeah. Is that different from? How is that different from schizophrenia?
I don't know enough about schizophrenia to say.
As a DPhil in psychiatry.
Yeah.
What do you think about companies like Neuralink and their vision of merging computers and brains in the future?
I think it's interesting. I don't know if it's possible.
That would have been my next question.
Yeah. I think brains are complicated, humans are complicated, machines are complicated, algorithms are complicated. There's a lot of complexity, and assuming that these two entities will be able to talk to each other is a pretty... I don't think it's an answered question. So I'm interested to see if it goes anywhere. I think that Neuralink it's probably run by some great scientists who have great ideas. I worry that it is directed by someone who is perhaps a little irresponsible at times. So I hope that it's guided by the idea of interesting, useful science. And I worry that it's guided by an egomaniac who's doing whatever his childish ambitions tell him to do on any given day. So I hope it's going to be a driver for progress. I do.
What are the implications, do you think? It doesn't. Yeah, we don't. It doesn't. We don't have to say Neuralink. Just this kind of technology.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating place for humanity to go, because then you end up in the point where your brain is essentially augmented by additional processing capability, perhaps for things that humans aren't great at doing. And
by GPT.
Yeah. But, again, it comes down to this idea that revolutions in technology can split the world between the haves and have-nots even more dramatically than it already is. And if this is something that benefits humanity and allows humanity to move forwards, then fantastic. But if it's something that allows white, middle-aged tech people to get better at their jobs, then was it really worth it?
How can you shape it in that way in order to benefit
politics?
Most people.
It needs good political intervention from good-willed individuals, and it needs people to come to the realization that if these things happen in our society, we need to deal with them and not just bury our heads in the sand.
So, the science, is there some way to go from the science side or the technology side?
I don't think so.
Right. It's mainly humans convincing other humans.
Exactly. Like when we discovered that you could split the atom, that technology eventually led to nuclear power and atrocities in Japan. And the science doesn't say anything about that. The scientists certainly did. But if the President of the United States thinks that he knows best, then he'll do what he wants.
Yeah.
And no science will necessarily convince him.
I guess you could say that it was followed by peaceful treaties and no more nuclear bombs. So,
do we feel like that's going well? Do we? There are, I think, more nuclear bombs at the moment than at any time in history in the stockpiles of America, Russia, the UK, soon North Korea.
But undetonated ones.
Currently.
But that's politics, no? That's what politics accomplished, not detonating those bombs.
Yes. We saw what detonating them does and very quickly backtracked.
Do you think there's a parallel where something like brain neurotechnology or AGI would go down this road? We see something very bad first.
I think it's plausible. I wonder if it will be as easy to, well, not easy, but I wonder if we will be as successful at stuffing it back into the box after it's done. Maybe that's the difference, is that, a nuclear bomb definitely caused problems for us. Like if we want metal to make Geiger counters, we have to find it from shipwrecks now, because everything else has too much radioactivity because we've dropped a load of bombs. Even just testing. And like, what's the equivalent of that going to be? When we're wading through the AI ravaged wastelands of planet Earth. We discover things, we learn their power, and we use them when we don't quite understand them fully, and that causes us problems.
Well, I don't want to be cliche, but the way you said it reminded me of social media. Like the negative aspects of social media is in some sense this remnant radiation everywhere.
Yeah, no,
like
absolutely.
we cannot go back, right?
Yeah.
And it's there, and it's affecting us all the time.
Yeah, I think for most people the question isn't, are you on social media, but which social media do you use? And people have their preferences for various reasons, but most people can't get away without using it. And there are deep impacts that even these companies have. I think Instagram did some studies and discovered that it was causing problems, particularly for like teenage girls and their body image.
Yeah.
And that's horrible. Like, Instagram is not worth that, to me at least. And we've generated these things that consume content and human attention, and I'm not sure that the gains we get from that are worth it. And we definitely can't put it away. People are hooked. People are addicted.
It's already partly caused by AI, because it's being optimized for certain goals, like all the recommendation systems and everything.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, just the optimization aspect, the tightly integrated optimization aspect is, I think, what's causing the problems.
Yeah, I mean, this comes into alignment, right? It's even when we're talking about AI
It's like
and
your stamp.
Yeah, exactly, right? We have these algorithms which are optimized to make maximum money for Facebook, Meta, sorry, and
maximize people's enjoyment.
But are they to maximize people's enjoyment or their engagement? Because those are different things, right? Because I know that when I go on Twitter, it makes me angry. I still do it because when I'm angry, I look more and I scroll more and I get angry at more things. And that's not enjoyment. I don't enjoy being angry.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
And the reason
how about TikTok, for example?
Yeah, I mean, they want to keep you there for as long as possible. And I think there is, for me at least, less anger-inducing content on TikTok. But it's still designed to hook you in. They don't care if you enjoy it. They only care that you watch. And that's the alignment mismatch, because the alignment of the user is, I want to enjoy content. And the alignment of the company is, I want you to watch ads and generate money for me.
I think it's a double issue. It's not just the company is a big part of it, this alignment that you're speaking of, but it's also misalignment within people, because you consume stuff that you enjoy, but then that has negative aspects in different parts of life.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's very cliche, but it's like the access to fast food and sugar, right? It's super enjoyable to people, but then it's actually detrimental because it's a misaligned goal.
Yeah,
right?
We've still got these monkey brains in our bodies that yell out, "I want hamburger," and then we buy hamburger because I want hamburger, and there's only so much we can do to control that, and some people are better than others. I am rubbish at resisting McDonald's. And I'm also rubbish at resisting angry things on Twitter. Maybe that's not a coincidence, Maybe my waistline and my wasted time are all closely linked.
Oh, that was a good one.
I know, I'm sorry.
Speaking of values, you're a strong veganist.
A strong veganist. Okay.
You're a vegan.
I'm a vegan.
Can you say more about your beliefs around this?
Yeah, sure. So I think that veganism is a net positive for the world. I'm a big fan of animals not suffering so that I can eat them when I don't need to. I am a fan of not producing massive amounts of carbon dioxide through animal agriculture. We still produce it through plant agriculture, no doubt, but a lot of plant agriculture currently is supporting animal agriculture. It's a wasteful process. So I think that for the planet's sake, more people should be vegetarian at least. And I think for the animal's sake, more people should be vegetarian at least. And I think if you're in a philosophical position where you agree with vegetarianism, I think it's really difficult not to justify the next step to veganism. At least for me, I struggle with being a vegetarian. It just doesn't really make sense to go halfway. And that's not meant to disincentivize people from being vegetarians, because it's pointless. Veganism is still, it's not difficult necessarily, but it's still relatively hard to achieve. And it's a case of finding balance. Because if everybody was vegetarian, that would probably be better than 50% of the planet being vegan and 50% being like huge meat eaters. I think that would probably be a net positive change. But yeah, I think we need to find our personal balance with what we can achieve. And there's always lapses. I'm not a perfect vegan by any stretch. I really like Yorkshire puddings. If there's a roast and it has Yorkshire puddings, I will eat them. They are made of eggs. That's my main cheat food. I cannot resist. I'm publicly shaming myself.
You're very British.
Yeah, no, I see a Yorkshire pudding and there is nothing I can do. I will eat that Yorkshire pudding. But at the same time, that's a pretty minor contribution compared to everyone else.
Do you worry about health effects or biological effects? So, because humans historically ate meat majority, right? So, how do you think about that?
So, I think I don't actively think about it very often. When I first went vegan, I talked to my GP and said, do I need to take any supplements? I've decided I'm doing this. What do I need to do? And she said, no, nothing, you're fine, which is incorrect.
I'm surprised.
It is absolutely 100% wrong.
No, I'm surprised the GP said that.
Yeah, no, same. I'm not necessarily surprised. It's like, people don't...
Mildly surprised.
Yeah, disappointed. I didn't know she was wrong at the time. And it went on to really severely impact my attention, because vegans struggle to get B12 from their diet. B12 is important for normal cognitive function. And if you don't have it for a long time, it can actually cause you long-term damage. Fortunately, I spoke to a friend who was training to be a doctor at the time. She was in med school. And I said, I've got these symptoms. What's going on? She said, well, have you gone vegan recently? I said, yes. How did you know that? And she said, well, this is what you're going through. And I worry that other people don't know. So if you're a vegan, take B12. It's important and will help your brain work properly. Also, like the Vegan Society supplies multivitamins that are designed to compensate for the lacks in a vegan diet. So I think they taste rank though. Oh, they're so bad. I tried them for a little while and I just couldn't keep eating them. They're like black currant, but like rotten black currant.
Cool.
It's grim. Yeah, so I think it's possible to be a well-fed vegan, and I'm not too worried about long-term consequences, but I guess I'll find out in 30 years.
Can you argue against being a vegan? I guess, philosophically, not for you personally. But...
I guess it is difficult, and is it wasted effort? I don't think it's wasted effort, but maybe if you don't care about climate change or animal suffering, then that's a facetious argument. I'm not sure that I can argue against it. I think it's a morally superior position.
That's why I said you're a strong vegan.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody tries to do what they think is morally superior some of the time. I've definitely done things which don't align with my morals, and I think everybody does that. That's the nature of being human. But for me, this is an easy win.
There's two spectrums, I guess. One is how much do you care about morals in general, and then on a specific thing, where are you?
Yeah.
But yeah. What is something that you believe that most people would disagree with?
I don't know. I have no idea how to answer that. That's a really good question. What do I believe? I think I'm very left wing, and I think more than most people. So I think probably I have social views that are misaligned with the general population.
With the majority.
Yeah.
Can you say one which sticks out?
I think that buses are the solution to poverty, which is an overstatement of my own belief, but I think that having good nationally owned public infrastructure for transportation is the key within a capitalist framework to stopping people being excluded from society. I don't know if that's I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion so much as something not many people have bothered to think about. But I think that buses are the most important thing we've ever invented.
So do you think it has this windfall effect on poverty?
Yeah. So if you are able to get to where the money is easily and cheaply, then you're more likely to do that. And if you can get to school, you're less likely to drop out. And if you can get to university, you're less likely to, go into a quote unquote low skilled job. It's about defining the access that people have to things. I can drive, so sometimes I do, and that means I can go places that would cost other people a lot of money. And part of that is an upfront investment in a car and insurance. And so I don't think that public transport is the only solution to what's going on, but I think it's pretty high on the list.
Would you say it's more important than providing free education, for example? High quality free education?
No, I don't think so. I think as long it contributes to it because it contributes to the access to that education. Like if I have to walk 10 miles to get to my lesson and you only have to walk like 300 meters, then we might both have access to free high quality education, but
and you'll be much fitter.
Okay, so maybe I need to move further away from Oba. But I think they all play into the same factors, and that's making society as accessible to everyone as we can.
We're getting to the end here, but I have one more not controversial, but I wonder if you have a controversial answer to it. Do you think there are topics which shouldn't be discussed at an office lunch?
Oh boy.
From your personal experience.
From my personal experience as the person who brings up the controversial topics at the office lunch.
Well.
Or at least always indulges.
Wonder if there's a filter there.
I think that there are boundaries that I wouldn't overstep. I never want to make people uncomfortable with what I discuss. I'm willing to maybe come closer to that boundary than other people. But I think you find most people, once they get past that initial half barrier, really quite enjoy sort of, the slightly more intense topics. We talk about things like euthanasia, and we end up discussing it from a psychological perspective and a psychiatric perspective and a neuroscience perspective and a social perspective. And, I'm sure there are plenty of offices where that would be a totally inappropriate thing to do. But when you know the minds around you and you know what they will talk about and what they're willing to, I think you can push boundaries a little bit. As long as you're always careful. And as long as you always prioritize the feelings of the people around you and don't intend to hurt anyone and listen, then I don't think there's a problem. It's always defined by the group. And we have that a lot at university. There's places where controversial topics are discussed. And there are some voices that I don't think should necessarily be elevated by places that are, there are views which are harmful to people without power in society. And as long as we aren't damaging people, I think that talking about things is fine.
So you do have a filter on yourself?
Yes, I think so. I aim not to mortally offend anyone. I aim not to make anybody's day worse. Ideally better. and to have interesting discussions along the way.
But I guess what I'm trying to get at is often hard to know what offends someone.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially in a workplace where, well, I guess we know quite well people here, but yeah, there could be some other people joining at lunch which we haven't seen before.
And you don't want to exclude those people. And so I guess you just kind of like figure out where those boundaries are for the new people, and as they come into the group, then things mutate and change, and you respect everybody's boundaries and just figure out where that is. But yeah, I would hate for us to not talk about interesting things because people were unsure. And I think a lot of the time we go into these without strong opinions, and we all talk together, and we end up finding out that we have opinions on things that we have no idea about. We talked once about like unusual YouTube tastes. Like what's the strangest YouTube video you've watched? And found some real interesting things, like particularly people talking about ASMR. And I'm not going to say that weird YouTube things are a controversial topic, but it's still people bearing their souls in a way. It's them telling us something which might be quite personal. Like, this is the way that I'm weird. And I love that our office and the people in it are so open to sharing that with their colleagues. I think we have not just an office here, but like a really nice community, and a group of people who have a mutual understanding and a mutual love of discussion of all things. And that's fantastic and a really lucky find. Yeah,
I really enjoy it as well. Is it worth ever offending people, or is it always out of the question? Can you make the case that it's sometimes worth it?
I've definitely offended people. And not all offence is necessarily justified. If...
Not in a conscious way, like not in an evil way. I mean, not wanting to offend, but still.
Yeah, I'm sure I have. And that's unpleasant. And I think if you do it and realise and you don't readjust afterwards, then you're a problem. In a workplace at least, if you're in a group of friends and you offend someone and everybody's got the right to leave and everybody can rebuke you as much as they like, then that's fine. But if you're in a workplace with power dynamics, then that's a different issue. I'm definitely inclined towards trying to avoid it, but I'm sure that I don't always.
Evan, my very last question. What is your life philosophy?
I think I like being happy as much as possible. I like other people being happy. I think everybody should get a fair shot. And
at being happy?
At being happy at whatever they need in life. If getting an education is the thing that people need to experience their life to the fullest, then that should be something that we provide them. If it's being fed, we should definitely do that. I think a lot of it just comes down to being super left-wing.
Creeps in a bit.
Yeah, just subtly, So whenever my next bus runs come up, you can direct them to this.
How do you find then happiness, and how do you make other people happy?
I think spending time with people is normally enough. I think that people make each other happy. They make each other sad as well, but I think a lot of happiness depends on having people around you whose company you enjoy. And so I guess actively seeking out the people who you match with is important. So that'd be how I actively pursue happiness, I suppose. Actively pursuing friendships.
Well, thank you very much. This has been an amazing conversation.
This was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you.